-4 degrees. Now for London, East Anglia and the South East, Sunday's looking like another bright but cold day, and we keep the cold air actually into the start of next week in the South East, but for the rest of the UK it's milder, it's cloudier and it's breezier.
On Mark Dolan tonight, in a world exclusive, Katie Price joins us live to talk fame, love, money, plastic surgery and her hopes for the future.
Get tuned in as for GB News. I'm meeting up with my old mate, Mark Dolan. It's been ages since I've done an interview with him.
That's Katie Price on Mark Dolan tonight on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel. Hello, good afternoon. It's 3 o'clock. You're with me. I'm Nana Akue. I'm in for Patrick Christys. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. So coming up this hour, we'll be bringing you a GB News exclusive. EU citizens living and working in the UK without a visa now face a very real prospect of arrest. Now, we've been given exclusive access to follow immigration officers raiding businesses in London with staff who with immigration officials who immigration officials claim were housing workers in the UK without the proper documentation. Now, are Border Force officials right to take such a tough line on EU workers who are here illegally? We'll discuss that next. Then the Unite Union, they've announced new strike action for ambulance workers in England and Wales to take place through February and March. 4 of the new dates announced will coincide with industrial action from the GMB union for emergency responders. Now, it means that the NHS will face major disruption to ambulance services in the coming months. And is 16 too young to decide to change your gender? The majority of the public seem to think so. That is according to the results of our exclusive GB News People's poll, and it follows Westminster's blocking Scotland's controversial gender recognition bill, which was designed to protect people from being discriminated against because of their sex or gender assignment. And joining me throughout the show today to give you his take on the topics we're discussing is former Brexit Party MEP Ben Habib. Great to have you on board, Ben, today. Right, join me. You can email me at gbnews@gbnews.uk or email me, or tweet me, actually. But first, let's get your latest headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 3:02. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Next month, we'll see the biggest strike action ever to hit the NHS after Unite announced 10 further days of industrial action by ambulance workers in the coming weeks. Members of Unite Union are joining 10,000 ambulance staff with the GMB Union, along with the Royal College of Nursing, in joint action on the 6th of February. The workers across England, Wales and Northern Ireland are walking out in a long-running dispute over pay and staffing. Downing Street says it's disappointed, but that they're open to further discussions. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is holding talks with around 50 Western nations, urging them to give more military aid to support their fight against Russia. Kyiv has requested 300 battle tanks. Germany's defence minister says they're ready to move quickly to provide their highly regarded Leopard 2s should an agreement be reached with their allies. And the US has announced a further £2 billion worth of support for Ukraine. US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin has vowed to support the country for as long as it takes.
Russia is regrouping, recruiting, and trying to re-equip. This is not a moment to slow down. It's a time to dig deeper. The Ukrainian people are watching us. The Kremlin is watching us. And history is watching us.
A new report into England's fire and rescue services says reforms are needed as a matter of urgency. The watchdog says just 2 of the 6 recommendations made by the Chief Inspectorate have been fulfilled. In an annual report, the Chief Inspector Andy Cook says he's frustrated at the lack of progress made since inspections started back in 2018. But the Chief Fire Officer at Leicester Fire and Rescue, Callum Faint, says he's confident the force is improving.
A really good report for us. It shows the advancements we've made over the last 3 years. Whilst we accept the feedback from the previous report, we were slightly disappointed in it, and we as a service have responded as a whole. Leicestershire Fire and Rescue Service is the 4th best at delivering the sheer number of home fire safety checks. What we have got a little bit of work to do is the number of referrals coming in from our partners is incredibly high, and we need to make sure we get the right amount of resources to address those home fire safety checks. And I'm really confident by the time of the next inspection we will be at a good level across the board of all areas that are assessed by HMI-CRFS.
A 19-year-old has pleaded guilty to plotting an Islamist terror attack allegedly targeting police officers or military personnel. Matthew King appeared at the Old Bailey this morning. He's alleged to have carried out surveillance at police stations, railway stations, a magistrate's court and a British Army barracks. Authorities had been tipped off about King through an anti-terrorist hotline after he posted a video on a WhatsApp group. And counter-terror police have arrested a man after a suspicious package was found on a maternity wing in Leeds, sparking an evacuation. Police say emergency services, including a bomb disposal unit, were called to St James's this morning. A cordon's currently in place around the hospital as a precautionary measure, and people are being asked to avoid the entrance. The Home Office says survivors of rape are having significant amounts of their personal records unnecessarily requested by police during investigations. In some cases, records have been used to test the credibility of survivors, which ministers describe as invasive. The government's vowed to change the law to better protect victims, speed up inquiries and restore confidence in the criminal justice system. MP Sarah Dines says these record requests are often irrelevant to the inquiry.
Quite often that's people like schools, educational records, even at times counselling records, and these organisations take a long time to respond. It undermines the trust of the rape victim in the process, and as time goes on, sometimes they fall away from the process altogether. No, we don't want that. We want to rebuild trust to make sure that every rape victim is treated fairly and gets to a fair trial in a decent amount of time.
High-profile influencer Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan will remain in custody for a further 30 days until the 27th of February after a Romanian court extended their police detention. The pair are being investigated over allegations of sexual assault and exploitation. A judge has decided they'll remain in prison for longer while police continue to investigate. The self-proclaimed misogynist was arrested in Bucharest on December the 29th. And the Church of England has apologised for what it describes as the shameful treatment of the LGBTQI+ community. As part of the formal apology, it admits to making some people feel rejected or excluded when they should be and are welcome and valued. It comes after the Church this week said it'll bless same-sex civil marriages for the first time, though its position on gay marriage in the Church won't change. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Nana Akwe.
Good afternoon. It is fast approaching 9 minutes after 3 o'clock. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akwe. I'm in for Patrick Christys. Well, GB News can reveal that EU citizens living and working in the UK without a visa will now face the real prospect of arrest and deportation. Immigration enforcement officials have been issued with new guidance that's allowing for the detention and removal of these EU nationals who are working here illegally. Now, our Home and Security editor, Mark White, was given exclusive access to follow immigration officers as they raided businesses in London, arresting 2 EU citizens from Romania, who officers said were actually in the UK without work visas.
We're on board with immigration officers in southeast London as they prepare to raid several businesses suspected of employing illegal immigrants. Arriving at this skip hire firm, these officers have to move fast if they're to stop their suspects disappearing. Searching all the possible hiding places as they go. Among those they're looking for, at least 2 Albanians. Immigration enforcement officers believe one of the men has run off.
Yeah, have you got a picture of it?
The other is behind the wheel of this vehicle, but a quick check reveals he has a proper work visa. Elsewhere, the rest of the workforce have gathered in this porta cabin as immigration officers check their status.
We're going to take you into this room and just speak to you in here, yeah?
After speaking to this Romanian, he was placed under arrest on suspicion of working in the UK without a proper visa. The senior immigration enforcement officer here told us they've now been issued with new guidance, allowing for the arrest of EU nationals living and working here illegally. Conservative MP Lee Anderson, who's on the Commons Home Affairs Select Committee, welcomed this apparent change in policy.
Well, it's welcome news because if EU citizens are here and they are working and they should not be working, then quite frankly they're breaking the law. And this problem is much bigger than we think, I believe. I believe that this is happening up and down the country, in every town and village and city. There's a hidden population of people who are working that should not be working.
Following Brexit, EU nationals arriving in the UK must have the appropriate visas if they want to live and work here. And although border officials have detained some EU nationals at ports and airports they suspect of planning to work here illegally, those EU citizens already in the UK but working without permission have not been pursued by immigration enforcement until now. At a second nearby business, immigration officers have arrested another Romanian suspected of working illegally. It signals a tougher approach from Rishi Sunak's government after he promised to crack down on those abusing UK immigration laws. But with well over 1 million people suspected of living and working in the illegal economy, these immigration enforcement officers have never been busier. Mark White, GB News, South East London.
Well, joining me to discuss this is international human rights lawyer David Hay. David, thank you very much for joining me. First of all, I mean, they're sort of talking, it was just 2 of them. I mean, there seems to be quite a lot of resource going towards it. Are you surprised at all that the Immigration Service has been given new guidelines allowing for the detention and removal of EU nationals working here illegally?
Good afternoon, Nana. I mean, I think it's certainly interesting timing. If you look at under the transition agreement, there was until summer 2021 for EU nationals to regularise their immigration status, apply for settlement, or whatever it may be. Now, why has the government waited a year and a half through various prime ministers to actually change that? That's one question that I have in mind. Now, it's something that we're seeing all across the EU as well. Only last week, the EU reported that apparently 300 Brits in Denmark are also facing a similar situation where they're looking at being deported. Interestingly, though, and this might be a clue as to what's to come over here, is that a number of those British people facing deportation from Denmark back to the UK are saying that the Danish government didn't use reasonable attempts to tell them how to regularise their status. So is that something that we're going to start seeing in the UK, more court battles, these people facing deportation?
A bit tit for tat, doesn't it? I mean, but then I suppose that's what we voted for, didn't we? We voted for people to be here, to go through the same checks and balances that everybody else goes through, and there's no special pass just because you're from the EU. Do you think it's likely that the government might sort of make it slightly more easier for people in the EU compared to those from outside it to enter this country? Are we likely to do some sort of deal there? Not free movement, but do you think there'll be some sort of deal coming down the pipeline?
Well, I think, like you said, you've seen 300 in terms of Denmark last week. You're seeing now the government pushing out news, which, quite frankly, they should have been doing a year and a half ago. So why now? Is it going to be a kind of a ongoing political battle with the EU? Is it something done just to essentially for the Conservative to appeal to their voter base? So I think that it's certainly going to be very interesting. I mean, legally, there's no reason why EU nationals should be treated differently to someone from the US, someone from India. They are, if they're here illegally, they should be dealt with appropriately. But it will be interesting, particularly looking at the Danish example, whether or not this is tit for tat, what's happening in other countries. There's obviously lots of Brits in EU countries like Spain, for instance, that will be facing similar situations.
Because I'm concerned that it might get a bit nasty. Do you know what I mean? Because we've had this wonderful sort of working relationship with the whole EU thing. A lot of countries are bitter that we left. And I'm just concerned, especially for people who've maybe bought properties in places like Spain. And do you know what I mean? You've bought something somewhere. Is there a likelihood that this could sort of escalate into a deeper divide as EU nationals get a bit annoyed and the countries that are surrounding start to get irritated with the sort of realisation that this is what Brexit means?
Well, absolutely, I think so. I mean, as I said with the Danish, we looked like literally only last week, 300 people. And then we pushed this, from the UK, we pushed this news out. What's happening elsewhere? Countries will use it for political purposes as well. And like I said, what you're going to face, as we've seen from the Danish example, you're going to face court battles. And maybe you're going to even see in terms of the UK, if for instance, if some of these Romanians say that a similar thing to the Danish, to the UK people, to the British people in Denmark, that the Danish government didn't advise them properly, everything is going to get stuck in the court for probably months or years to come. And as you said, it's probably going to get more and more bitter.
Anyway, David, thank you very much for that. That's David Haig. He's an international human rights lawyer. Lovely to talk to you. Thank you very much. Well, joining me, my friend, well, I think do you still like me, Ben? I'm all right.
Oh, my goodness, absolutely.
My friend throughout the show is Ben Habib. Now, Ben, you've been an MEP. So you'll have a good idea of all the sort of Brexit side of things. Of course, you're a Brexit MEP.
Yeah.
Do you think it's going to end up with a bit of a tit for tat?
Well, I mean, what's very interesting, I think it's worth noting, first of all, that we gave 6.5 million EU member state citizens settled and pre-settled status. So if you lived here for more than 5 years and you could evidence that and you applied, you got settled status, never having to leave. And if you had been here for less than 5 years at the time that we left the EU, you still had the right to stay. So we've been incredibly generous as a nation. And it was one of the bugbears for the EU during the negotiations back in 2016 onwards.
That long ago.
I know, that long ago, that EU citizens shouldn't be discriminated against in the UK. And, of course, we've gold-plated that and been incredibly generous. The EU, I don't know if you recall this, Nana, but at the outset, the EU refused to reciprocate the unilateral declaration we made back after the referendum that we wouldn't forcibly deport any EU citizens. We are a very welcoming country. And here we are in 2023, 6.5 million EU member state citizens given the right to stay. And if there are some here working illegally, they should be deported. They've had every signal, every opportunity to regularise their stay in the UK. If they haven't done it, woe betide them, off they go. But it shouldn't just be applied to EU member state citizens.
Right.
Anyone working in this country should be deported, shouldn't they? Anyone entering this country illegally should be deported. And it's quite telling.
A load of people who are coming on boats.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you opened by saying, it's only 2 people, but did you see the news clip? It was as if there was a massive crackdown on illegal working in the UK, and that's because this is quite a sensitive subject for the government. It realised that it hasn't done anywhere near enough to get a grip of what are effectively open borders. So they're championing this, and great. I mean, I hope they get it. I hope they do more of it.
It's interesting, isn't it, that they're because they don't want to look bad, because you don't want to look bad because you're not treating people who've come on boats in a different way to the people who've come from the EU. So I suppose they now have to make sure that they're cracking down on all of it, so that nobody looks like they're getting.
It should be uniform, and
absolutely.
If you can call, Rishi Sunak has a number of 5-point plans. One of them was a 5-point plan for illegal immigration to the United Kingdom. And one of those 5 points he made was that the immigration officers should go around the UK and round up people who are working here illegally. They're doing their job.
Well, that's what they're meant to be doing. That's what they're meant to be doing.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk strikes, because, everyone seems to be wanting to go on strike. Unite, the unions, announced today that workers from 5 ambulance trusts in England and Wales will go on strike on February the 6th. Now, they'll join nurses and paramedics from the GMB union, who are walking out the same day. Teachers are also set to walk out in February, and the unions are meeting with the Education Minister, Gillian Keegan, today in a bid to stop action going ahead. So joining me now to give us the latest is GB News' political reporter, Olivia Utley. OK, so Olivia, what's the reaction been to Unite's announcement of more strikes?
Well, everyone's pretty fed up with strike after strike, but the problem from the government's perspective is the public isn't really blaming the strikers. The public, on the whole, is blaming the government for this. And we saw this sort of glimmer of hope last week that some agreement was going to be reached, and it sounded as though Steve Barclay was softening and asking union leaders to help him persuade the government, to persuade Rishi Sunak to give them a pay rise, essentially. But that hope ebbed away last night when talks ended in absolutely nothing at all. And the calculation on behalf of the unions appears to be that while the public is still behind them, at least Unite, at least the health unions, the public is very much behind the NHS strikers, there is no point in capitulating to what the government is asking for. And there seems to be mounting frustration on both sides, from what I'm hearing. Both sides are just accusing the other of digging in. The unions are saying that the government dresses up talks as negotiations, but actually they're not willing to compromise on any aspect of what the unions are asking for. So it doesn't look as though we're going to see any change anytime soon. We could be headed for strikes going well into the summer on every front, as Mick Lynch threatened just a couple of weeks ago.
Yes, and unlike Arthur Scargill in his last set of strikes, Mick Lynch seems to be quite organised. He's organising this very well. And unlike Mrs Thatcher, Rishi Sunak doesn't appear that organised at all. But in actual fact, I think that perhaps the government are playing a bit of a waiting game, because the longer these goes on, just like with the rail unions, the more annoyed the public will start to get and the more they'll lose favour. I mean, as you said, there's not really much in terms of any sort of negotiation going on. I mean, what is happening? Is there any conversations being had?
Well, there are these conversations being had which the unions would say are not really conversations at all. They're the government saying that it's going to talk. Then the problem keeps appearing to be that the government ministers schedule very little time in their diaries for these conversations. And the sort of implication from the unions is that they're all about show and not really serious about getting to some sort of resolution. As you say, it could be that the government's playing a long game and sort of hoping that public support for the strike sort of ebbs away as frustration grows. But that's a dangerous game to be playing, because so far what we've seen is, yes, on the rail strikes, public is slowly losing support. But on the NHS strikes, the public is blaming the government for this, not the strikers. We're seeing that in poll after poll. So Rishi Sunak could just be the Prime Minister who presided over sort of years on end of strikes, and the blame for that will lay right at his door.
Yes, he presided on that without wearing his seatbelt as well, which is rather unfortunate of him to film himself on camera without a seatbelt on and then to post it.
Second time he's broken the law.
I know. Well, is he going to get an FPN? Are we going to do all the Partygate, Cakegate, now seatbelt gate? Maybe we should all divert attention from the strikes and start talking about that. Listen, Ben, do you think that, as I said, the long game, but do you think part of the government strategy as well is also to wait for interest rates to fall further? Because they're asking for way above interest rate sort of pay deals.
Rises, yeah.
But if inflation comes down, then they won't look...
Of course, once prices go up, they stay up. So even though they may reach a settlement later, it'll be at the expense of these people's welfare. And I think it's very important to recognise that over the last 12, 13 years, the public sector actually has suffered. You know, it's suffered twice over. We've had rampant inflation in this country for 13 years. People are going to be looking at their screens thinking, why is he saying that? It's only raised its ugly head in the last 12 months. That's not true. We had rampant asset price inflation after the credit crunch as we printed money, saved the banks, and then imposed austerity actually on the public sector. So you saw house prices go out of their reach. Aspiration was stripped from the working and middle classes. And now we have consumer prices rising dramatically, stripping them of the ability to eat and heat their homes. But the point that I want to make is the private sector has already given salary rises of in excess of 7% per annum. The public sector is around 3%. The private sector has recognised you've got to get ahead of this problem. If we want our businesses to run, if we want to remain profitable, we have to get ahead of the problem, and the government just hasn't done it.
But I thought a lot of the public sector jobs were paid better than the private sector. I think that hasn't happened.
Well, there are.
They also have things like pensions and things.
Yeah, they're less likely to be fired.
Exactly.
They get much more job security. They have pensions. They have unions. You can unionise in the private sector as well, of course. And some of the strikes going on are private sector strikes by that definition.
Yeah.
But private companies understand the need to stay in business and to make money, and the government just hasn't quite got that yet.
They love spending money. Well, thank you very much, Olivia Udley, for joining me as well. Ben Habib will be with me throughout the show. I can't get rid of him. Listen, it's just coming up. It's just gone 24 minutes past 3 o'clock. I'm Nana Akwe. This is GB News. Coming up, the Women's Charity Refuge left over 1,000 rotten apples outside New Scotland Yard earlier. Now, it was all part of a protest against a number of officers in the Metropolitan Police being investigated on allegations of domestic abuse. We'll have that on the way next.
On Mark Dolan tonight in a world exclusive, Katie Price joins us live to talk fame, love, money, plastic surgery and her hopes for the future.
Get tuned in for GB News. I'm meeting up with my old mate, Mark Dolan. It's been ages since I've done an interview with him.
That's Katie Price on Mark Dolan tonight on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching. Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other pay-per-review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
If you just join me, it's just coming up to 29 minutes after 3 o'clock. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Aquare. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on our GB News exclusive on the immigration raids and those who have who've come from the EU, who are here illegally. John says, couldn't the government set up companies to gather illegal immigrants and pay the companies a fee for every person they find? I think you've got something there. Listen, if anyone's listening, hopefully one of them, somebody out there is listening in the government, that's a good idea. Joe says these raids are good to see, but I fear they're being used as a distraction from the channel crossings. Yeah, seems that way. Karen says, why are GB News making such a big thing of one Romanian being arrested? It wasn't one, it was two. It was two. It's nothing but a distraction. And another woman called Karen says, there's two Karens, said, we need to stop being so soft when it comes to illegal immigration. If it was us Brits arriving illegally in another country, do you think we'd be dealt with so softly? I think the answer to that is no, and it depends where it is as well, because most places wouldn't even have it. Well, listen, coming up, the women's charity Refuge dumped over 1,000 rotten apples outside New Scotland Yard this morning in protest against the number of Met officers who've been or are currently under investigation for allegations of domestic abuse. Now, the force is under intense pressure to regain the public's trust after admitted opportunities were missed to catch David Carrick, the serving officer who committed or admitted to carrying out 24 counts of rape. Catherine Forster, our GB News political reporter, joins me from Westminster. She was at the protest earlier. Catherine, what was the mood of the demonstrators like?
Well, immense frustration, anger, obviously, that it has come to this, and that the depth of issues and misogynistic attitudes, not to mention behaviours of some of the Metropolitan Police, but I think also a huge determination that things must change. The demonstration was at the Met Police headquarters, of course, which is actually literally a couple of minutes round the corner from Big Ben. And the rotten apples, it was really quite striking. 1,071. That's the number of Metropolitan Police officers who are being or have been investigated about potential sexual misconduct or domestic abuse claims. And we hear, don't we, after the murder of Sarah Everard by Wayne Couzens, oh, well, you know, there's the occasional bad apple. There's a few bad apples in the police. Well, it does look like it's considerably more than a few. This, of course, all triggered by the conviction of David Carrick, a serving police officer now sacked earlier in the week, convicted of 49 crimes against women, including 24 rapes. The chief of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Mark Rowley, has now said very publicly that they are sorry and that he should never have become a police officer in the first place, because 20 years ago, before he even joined the police, there were serious allegations against him. There were then 9 further incidents that were not sufficiently investigated. including back only in July 2021, he was arrested for rape, but the Met did not view it as sufficiently serious to suspend him from duty. So obviously, real anger at the huge dysfunction at the heart of the capital's police service.
Absolutely dreadful, isn't it? Now, do you think that the protest will actually make any difference to the Met's efforts to clean itself up?
Well, I think there is now huge pressure on the Metropolitan Police. This is so damning and so public. Refuge, of course, is the biggest domestic abuse charity in the UK. They say that 1 in 4 women during their lifetime will be subject to domestic abuse, and that every 30 seconds a woman rings the police with that sort of complaint. Now, of course, the police are often our first port of call, aren't they, when we're vulnerable, when we're in need of support. And the idea that there are a potentially considerable number of male police officers operating still who are guilty of some of these crimes is absolutely terrifying for women, and trust is very, very difficult to get back, isn't it, once it's been lost?
Well, yes, of course it is. Catherine, thank you very much. That's Catherine Forster. She's a GB News political reporter. You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. Coming up, we'll be discussing the ongoing saga of whether or not Germany sends tanks to Ukraine. The European power was refusing to allow the export of its tanks for fear of antagonising Putin and appearing out of step with the US. We'll discuss that next, but first, let's get your latest news headlines.
It's 3:33. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB Newsroom. Next month, we'll see the biggest strike action ever to hit the NHS after Unite announced 10 further days of industrial action by ambulance workers in the coming weeks. Members of Unite Union are joining 10,000 ambulance staff with the GMB Union, along with the Royal College of Nursing, in joint action on the 6th of February. The workers across England, Wales and Northern Ireland are walking out in a long-running dispute over pay and staffing. Downing Street says it's disappointed, but that they're open to further discussions. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has held talks with around 50 Western nations, urging them to give more military aid to support their fight against Russia. Kyiv has requested 300 tanks, including Germany's highly regarded Leopard 2 tanks. Germany's defence minister says they're ready to move quickly should an agreement be reached with their allies. A new report into England's fire and rescue services says reforms are needed as a matter of urgency. The watchdog says just 2 of the 6 recommendations have been fulfilled. In an annual report, the Chief Inspector Andy Cook says he's frustrated at the lack of progress made since inspections started back in 2018. And controversial influencer Andrew Tate, along with his brother, will remain in custody for a further 30 days until the end of February, after a Romanian court extended their police detention. The pair are being investigated over allegations of sexual assault and exploitation. A judge has decided they'll remain in prison for longer while police continue to investigate. The self-proclaimed misogynist was arrested in Bucharest on December the 29th. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Nana Akua will be back in just a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good afternoon. It's 38 minutes after 3 o'clock. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akweer. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has appealed to Western allies to provide his embattled country with more battle tanks. The UK has already pledged to give the Ukraine 14 of its Challenger 2 tanks, with the hope that it will encourage other Western countries to do the same. Germany, on the other hand, hasn't authorised the export of its Leopard 2 tanks to assist in the war effort. Now, that is in part because Chancellor Olaf Scholz is wary of further antagonising Vladimir Putin. So to give us his thoughts on this story is former head of counter-terrorism at the MOD, Major General Chip Chapman. Major General Chip Chapman, thank you very much for joining me. Now, Ukraine claimed that its own Soviet-era tanks can't match Russia's tanks, so surely it is a no-brainer that Western countries should be providing them with the modern battle tanks that they're asking for.
Yeah, you can't win by being on the defensive, so only two things can pertain. You either need a combined arms fleet of tanks and armoured personnel vehicles and mechanised infantry combat vehicles to go on the offensive, and that's why these tanks are needed, or you have precision strike, which can beat mass, but it takes time. And actually, in terms of what the Brits have given in the last few days, yesterday at Tallinn, they gave 600 Brimstone missiles. They are huge precision strike munitions, which probably will have more impact than the 14 Challenger 2s that we've given.
So there's a bit of a... But a lot of people are worried, though, because people often say that if you give them these tanks, they could actually fall into the wrong hands. So if, for example, we give them really modern tanks, this is one of the arguments that they're using against not sending tanks, that they could fall into the enemy's hands. We don't want them to have that technology.
Well, on the Challenger 2 tanks, there were two concerns. One was to do with the radios, which the fills of those radios, the codes were secret. But I think they're going to be stripped off, the antenna bases and all the generators and things like that. The second one is that you'll have risk assessed that in terms of the likelihood and have some action to take if that occurs. So I don't think that should be a driver. The driver should be the fact that all those countries, for example, which surround Russia, know that this is a revanchist Russia, which wants a new empire and wants to see the defeat of Russia, and that Ukraine should win by that. Essentially, those were all the speeches of Sanna Marin of Finland, who were invaded in 1939 and border Russia, Kaja Kallas of Estonia, border Russia, same message. So they know what Russia is like. So it wasn't the eastward move of Russia, which those countries, the eastward move of NATO, they feared. It was the westward move of Russia. And that's the reason that Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, all those countries joined NATO. They wanted the protection of that organisation.
And now, what is Germany's real excuse for this? Because they're saying that, obviously, they don't want to aggravate Putin. They're obviously still relying on a lot of gas from him as well. But it seems madness for them not to, because they obviously, I think it's Berlin hold the export licenses for them. It seems a bit mad that they don't sort of get on with it. Because otherwise they will be in the firing line at some point, and they are in a very vulnerable position already.
Well, the first point is that Germany now imports that's absolutely zero gas, oil, or coal from Russia, and in fact, US now has more gas than Germany used to. So that's the first point. The second point, of course, is the complexity of German politics. Because of what happened in the 20th century, they've always had Ostpolitik was always their sort of line. That is that they saw the demise of the Cold War through engagement, not by the use of hard power. And that is that the 20th century had demonstrated the futility of force rather than utility of force. Now, what we're seeing with Russia, of course, is that if they win, that was essentially Sanna Marin's message, that Russia would have demonstrated once again the utility of force. But it's that backdrop which makes it complicated for the Russians to move in a sort of oneer. One of the interesting things, of course, is that the people in Germany who do want to see sort of tanks and the most support is actually amongst the Green Party. Now, you might find that might be slightly aberrant, but the reason for that is they emphasise human rights and justice and values and all those things that they see as Russia have negated in the way that they've conducted the invasion.
So what is... I mean, I'm not quite understanding, though, why Germany won't want to sort of give them the tanks that they're asking for. I know they're saying that until they'll do it once America do it. But I'm just wondering what is... I mean, we're already quite vulnerable. All the countries that are surround Russia are very vulnerable. And if Putin gets the strength that he, of time, then everybody's in the firing line. So I don't really understand why they won't want to get on with it.
Well, ultimately, it is a sovereign decision, and I think the Germans will take the decision at some time. They want to try and minimise their risk by trying to get the Americans to move at the same time as them with the very capable Abrams tank. The reason that the Americans don't want to send that is not because of the capability, but because of the complexity. It uses jet fuel, for example, in the way that a Leopard would just use normal petrols, oils and lubricants. So that's a complication in terms of how maintenance and logistics and capability work. I think if they don't send it, then in terms of their influence in Europe long term, that will be negated. And no one would buy from the German arms industry, because what's the point of buying kit from the Germans, which went then under export licenses, you can't use when there is potentially an existential threat to a neighbouring country.
That does seem a bit foolish of them to behave in that way. And even though many people will be applauding Britain as we continue to support Ukraine, should we be concerned about the possible depletion of our own defence capabilities? Seeing as we're sending all this stuff, we have our army is way too small. We are making ourselves even more vulnerable.
Well, the Chief of the General Staff said this week that sending just a squadron of Challenger 2 tanks, 14, weakens the British Army. That's an extraordinary admission for a squadron of tanks. But the thing that really is the key here is that it is better to defeat your enemy by having no boots on the ground, by supporting someone else, than to have to fight that potential enemy later on. So it makes sense. So, for example, from an American perspective, 5% of the defence budget to defeat a persistent enemy with no boots on the ground seems like a good cost-benefit analysis from that perspective, and makes geopolitical and geostrategic sense.
Well, Major Chip Chapman, thank you very much for your expertise. He's the former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence. Well, joining me in the studio is Ben Habib. Ben, how do you feel about this? What are Germany doing?
Well,
why are they doing this?
Germany has always had a very unhealthy relationship with Russia. You'll remember the construction of Nord Stream, which effectively cut out Ukraine, cut out Poland, and got gas straight from Russia to Germany. And a lot of people were up in arms about that. And Major General Chip Chapman may be right that they're not directly importing gas and oil from Russia, but there's a lot of evidence that Germany is still importing gas and oil from third countries that have bought it from Russia. And at least in the initial phases of sanctions, Germany did not switch off its dependency on gas or oil.
They took their time.
They took their time, and then Nord Stream was blown up. And that went under the radar pretty much, which is quite curious to me. I'm not going to be part of any conspiracy theory. But it wasn't in Russia's interest to blow up Nord Stream. It wasn't in Germany's interest. So who blew up Nord Stream? I'm just going to put it out there to viewers. Germany has been incredibly slow to react to Russia. And you might also be aware that there was a discussion in amongst the countries that were sanctioning Russia saying that there's got to be a cap imposed globally on the price that you can buy Russian oil at. And Germany was arguing for a higher and higher cap because they wanted Russian oil to flow. So Germany, I think, is in the crosshairs. It's been very reluctant to send military assistance. The Leopard tanks absolutely should go. Of course, they have the ability to restrict any countries that have bought Leopard tanks from passing those Leopard tanks onto Russia because they've got the export licenses. And it's a really good reason, by the way, now I don't want to get on to Brexit, but it's a really good reason why the United Kingdom is out. We're not going to be fettered by these kind of vested interests that countries like Germany have exercised.
That's the thing, isn't it? Because it's the impact that it would have on the EU as a whole. Because if everyone looks at it and says, hang on a minute, they can stop this and we bought them from you, yeah, they're ours. So if we're in this wonderful supposed customs union, but yet you're in control.
Yeah, and I mean, Germany's always had that massive... You know, Germany, who calls the shots in Europe? It's Germany and to some extent France.
But people accept
You've got
that.
a little belligerent Macron, you know.
But people accept that if you're fair and they feel they can trust you. But as soon as you start calling the shots and then you start taking control and then people can't trust you, then... That's...
And I think Germany on tanks, by the way, just very quickly, Germany on tanks, I think, is quite concerned because tanks are an offensive weapon. So far, a lot of the weaponry that we've exported has been defensive, even missiles, you know, effectively defensive. But tanks allow you to take ground. And I think Germany, you know, is concerned about the impact that that'll have on their relationship with Russia.
Well, listen, Ben, thank you very much for that. Stay with me because we've got loads more. Moving on to this story today, a group of soldiers are set to finish their 100-mile march to Babs Mill Lake in Solihull in memory of the children who lost their lives there. Led by Sergeant Brad Hawkins, members from the Royal Hussars have been walking from their base in Tidworth to Birmingham. Now, they're raising money for Birmingham's Children's Hospital. Now, West Midlands reporter Jack Carson is in Solihull for us. Jack, why was it so important for these soldiers to do this?
Well, Sergeant Brad Hawkins, who is the one that instigated this whole charity walk, grew up here in Kingshurst, where, of course, that terrible tragedy with the 4 boys losing their lives after falling to the lake in early December happened. He grew up here. He used to play around the lake. He was part of the boating club that was here. And so when that tragedy happened, it kind of really hit him quite hard. And being based down in Tidworth in Wiltshire with the Royal Hussars, he felt like he couldn't come and be part of this community. He couldn't come and support his family and his friends that still live here, and so he wanted to do something. And with the request, with the permission of the family, organised this 100-mile charity walk from their base in Tidworth all the way up through the likes of Swindon, Burford, Warwick, to here in Solihull, where a couple of hours ago they arrived. They laid the flag that they've been carrying on the walk and a teddy bear. With the crest of the Royal Hussars on it, and I spoke to Sergeant Hawkins about why he wanted to do this walk and how it's been for him.
Part of the Kingshurst community is just essentially giving back to the families and the community itself, because watching them all come together, it was emotional, do you know what I mean? And me being down south in Tidworth, I couldn't give back in a sense, so I just thought to myself that I need to do something. It's been grueling at times. It's very much like mind over matter. At the start it was kind of, it's just walking, do you know what I mean? It'll be all right. And then I think 50 miles in and blisters started appearing, swelling started coming. We've pushed past it, we got rid of the demons. I mean, the support as well, we've had lads keep joining us throughout the legs.
And what's kept you going through all of it?
Just getting to the end, do you know what I mean? Like, if I put my mind to something, like, I want to finish it, and essentially that's what I want to do. If I'm in pain or not, I'll do it, do you know what I mean? So that's the main reason, and it's for the families as well, and just being able to remember the boys.
Well, still, even after finishing a 100-mile walk, Sergeant Hawkins was still able to walk down the road for a well-deserved pint in the pub. The money they've raised, around £2,000 they've raised for the Birmingham Children's Hospital doing this. The Just Giving page is still open, so people can still donate to this cause. But today, that 100-mile walk has been completed for the Babs Mill boys.
That's our West Midlands reporter. Jack Carlson, thank you so much. He's there in Solihull. Now it's time for our GB News People's Poll. This week we've been asking you about the big gender debate. Now, a vast majority of you said that 16-year-olds are too young to change their gender. 41% completely agreed that this is too young, whilst just 8% say that they completely disagreed. It can also reveal that 22% of the public strongly support the government's blocking of the controversial gender reform bill. So with me now is Peter Tatchell. He's an LGBTQ activist and director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation. Peter, thank you very much for joining me. Now, Peter, what do you think what do you make of that, the results that you're seeing on that poll? Is that what you would expect?
Well, first let me say I'm not trans, but I am a trans ally for 50 years, and I'm trying to reflect the views of trans people because I understand that no trans person was available to do this interview. The poll is very, very, very interesting, but it is based upon a huge amount of misinformation. Nobody is proposing that trans people can change their gender at the age of 16. What is being proposed in Scotland is that a person can get a gender recognition certificate, which is just basically an identity document, at the age of 16 or 17 if they've lived in their affirmed gender for 6 months or more. So it's not about actually changing their physical gender at all. It's just a certificate. And the certificate only basically gives affirmation of a person's gender in terms of birth certificate, marriage certificate, and death certificate. It does not give a trans person any rights whatsoever, and it certainly doesn't involve physically changing their body through surgery.
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, I think that's the same difference, isn't it? OK, so you don't go through the medical process, but you've gone through the legal process. And I don't think that people are concerned about the medical side of it. I think it's the legal aspect of what that then entitles you to do. So as a woman, if you're a man and you're able to change your gender legally at 16 without any need for any sort of medical supervision with regard to it, then I think the worry is that it will be that aspect of it. Those who are maybe not as, I mean, most trans people are pretty decent, reasonable people. Nobody's even saying that. What they're saying is that it opens it out for abuse of the system.
Well, of course, the Scottish proposals are very, very strict. First of all, they give the Scottish government or registrar the power to refuse a gender recognition certificate to any person who has been convicted of a sexual assault. So that is very, very clear. That's a safeguarding principle. The second point to make is that if someone falsely claims to be trans and seeks a gender recognition certificate through fraud when they're not really trans, they can be jailed for up to 2 years. So that is a very clear protection against abuse.
Well, you say
and
that
even if there were some abuses, the point is we don't make laws in this country based upon what a small minority might do. For example, a very small minority of Muslims are terrorists, but we don't therefore restrict the rights of all Muslims because of the behaviour of that small minority. And the same applies with trans people. If there are trans people who do bad things, they should of course be punished. But we don't frame the law based upon bad actions by a tiny minority.
Well, you say they could be jailed for 2 years. I suppose in which prison? I'm going to bring Ben Habib in because he wants to ask you a question, Peter, if that's OK. Ben.
Well, I mean, for me, the issue, I want to roll the debate back a bit. We operate a form of law in the United Kingdom where everything is permissible unless it's specifically not permissible. And the problem I have with this law, and with indeed a lot of laws, you know, born of the same kind of motivation, is that they're legislating where legislation isn't required. Why is this even taking up parliamentary time? And just to put the problem into context, that there are 250,000 transgender people, less than 250,000 transgender people in the United Kingdom, only a couple of thousand a year transgender.
Yeah.
This is really a non-issue for parliamentary time and for the populace at large.
Well, I think you might say
it doesn't require legislation.
Well, I don't think it does require legislation, but in particular, I think I'd rather it didn't have legislation in that way. And I think it's interesting because the effect it will have on women. And I think that's what, me as a woman, that's what we're mainly concerned about, Peter.
Well, absolutely. I totally agree that women's welfare and safety must be protected. But I don't see any evidence of what's proposed in Scotland will change that. I mean, there are already 15 countries where gender recognition, self-ID is permitted, including countries like Belgium, France, Ireland and Malta, Denmark and Norway. They've had these laws in place for many years and they've had no problems. The scaremongering, I find, is so shocking. It is demonising a minority of people, trans people, who do suffer from very high levels of prejudice, discrimination, hate crime, and so on.
Listen, Peter Tatchell, always good to talk to you. Thank you so much. We will talk more about this. We're running out of time. That's Peter Tatchell there. You're with me. I'm Nana Akwe. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. More to come in the next hour after the weather.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akwe, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel. Good afternoon. It is 4 o'clock. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akwe. I'm in for Patrick Christys. You'll be pleased to know he's back next week. Coming up this hour, we have a GB News immigration exclusive. People living in the UK from the EU without a visa are now facing a serious prospect of being arrested. Immigration enforcement officers have been issued with new guidance, allowing for the detention and removal of EU nationals who are working here illegally. GB News has been given exclusive access to follow immigration officers raiding businesses in London. We'll be bringing you the latest on that in just a moment. King Charles III and Camilla, the Queen Consort, have been holding royal engagements in Bolton today. Now, the couple are celebrating 150 years of the borough's town hall. Our royal reporter Cameron Walker has been following the events throughout the day. We'll be speaking to him in just a few moments' time. And the world's defence leaders convened at the Ramstein in Germany in a bid to resolve disagreement over tanks for Ukraine. The UK's agreed to send Challenger 2 tanks to the war zone, but German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is wary of handing over its own fighting vehicles. And that is, of course, for fear of angering Vladimir Putin. We'll bring you the latest from the conference. And joining me throughout the show today to give you his take on the topics we're discussing is former Brexit Party MEP Ben Habib. As ever, you can get in touch. You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The NHS will see the biggest strike action ever in the industry as the Unite Union announced 10 further days of industrial action by ambulance workers in the coming weeks. They joined 10,000 ambulance staff with the GMB union, along with the Royal College of Nursing, in joint action on the 6th of February. The workers across England, Wales and Northern Ireland are walking out in a long-running dispute over pay and staffing. Downing Street says it's disappointed, but they're open to further discussions. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is holding talks with around 50 Western nations, urging them to give more military aid support for their fight against Russia. Kyiv has requested 300 battle tanks. Germany's defence minister says they're ready to move quickly to provide their highly regarded Leopard 2s should an agreement be reached with their allies. And the US announced a further £2 billion worth of support for Ukraine. US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin has vowed to support the country for as long as it takes.
Russia is regrouping, recruiting, and trying to re-equip. This is not a moment to slow down. It's a time to dig deeper. The Ukrainian people are watching us. The Kremlin is watching us. And history is watching us.
A new report into England's fire and rescue services says reforms are needed as a matter of urgency. The watchdog says just 2 of the 6 recommendations made by the Chief Inspectorate have been fulfilled. In an annual report, the Chief Inspector, Andy Cook, says he's frustrated at the lack of progress made since inspections started in 2018. But the Chief Fire Officer at Leicester Fire and Rescue, Callum Faint, says he's confident the force is improving.
A really good report for us. It shows the advancements we've made over the last 3 years. Whilst we accept the feedback from the previous report, we were slightly disappointed in it, and we as a service have responded as a whole. Leicestershire Fire and Rescue Service is the 4th best at delivering the sheer number of home fire safety checks. What we have got a little bit of work to do is the number of referrals coming in from our partners is incredibly high, and we need to make sure we get the right amount of resources to address those home fire safety checks. I'm really confident by the time of the next inspection we will be at a good level across the board of all areas that are assessed by HMI CRFS.
A 19-year-old has pleaded guilty to plotting an Islamist terror attack allegedly targeting police officers or military personnel. Matthew King appeared at the Old Bailey this morning. He's alleged to have carried out surveillance at police stations, railway stations, a magistrates' court and a British Army barracks. Authorities had been tipped off about King through an anti-terrorist hotline after he posted a video on a WhatsApp group. The National Police Chiefs Council are urging police chiefs across England and Wales to have all officers checked against national databases by the end of March. The Home Office made the order, which came in the wake of the crimes committed by former police officer David Carrick, who admitted to 49 criminal charges, including 24 counts of rape. The NPCC says its chair has written to all chief constables urging them to take immediate action. Now, the Home Office says survivors of rape are having significant amounts of their personal records unnecessarily requested by police during investigations. In some cases, records have been used to test the credibility of survivors, which ministers describe as invasive. The government's vowed to change the law to better protect victims, speed up inquiries and restore confidence in the criminal justice system. MP Sarah Dine says these record requests are often irrelevant to the inquiry.
Quite often that's people like schools, educational records, even at times counselling records, and these organisations take a long time to respond. It undermines the trust of the rape victim in the process, and as time goes on, sometimes they fall away from the process altogether. No, we don't want that. We want to rebuild trust to make sure that every rape victim is treated fairly and gets to a fair trial in a decent amount of time.
High-profile social media influencer Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan will remain in custody for a further 30 days until the 27th of February after a court in Romania has extended their police detention. The pair are being investigated over allegations of sexual assault and exploitation. A judge has decided they'll remain in prison for longer while police continue to investigate. The self-proclaimed misogynist was arrested in Bucharest on the 29th of December. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Nana.
It's just coming up to 8 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News. I'm Nana Akweer. We are live on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, we can reveal that EU citizens living and working in the UK without a visa will now face the real prospect of arrest and deportation. Immigration enforcement officers have been issued with new guidance allowing for the detention and removal of those EU nationals who are working here illegally. Our Home and Security Editor Mark White was given exclusive access to follow immigration officers as they raided businesses in London, arresting 2 EU citizens from Romania, whose officers are said to be in the UK without work visas. Let's speak to Richard Hewison. He's the leader of the Rejoin EU party. Richard, thank you very much for joining me. Richard, where are you?
Thank you for having me on, Anna. Lovely to be with you today. Thank you.
Well, good to be with you. So, Richard, what do you make of this then? I mean, look, we've left the EU, so if you are in a country without the right papers and you are here illegally, you've overstayed your visa, then fair enough, right? You should be detained or whatever it is that happens.
I have to say I have deep concerns about this. I think it's a very sad situation that we've ended up on. And let's remind ourselves that many, many people from the EU came to the UK on a promise that they could settle for life here and have work for life here. And that promise has been very, very badly broken. And let's be honest as well, not everyone is quite as up to date on what papers they need to have. They may have relocated their lives years ago, and they may not have been taught through the correct paperwork to do now. And indeed, a lot of anecdotal evidence we've seen is that many people who are former EU citizens have not been made fully aware of what their situation currently is here. So I think it's a very sad day, this.
Well, I suppose, but I mean, it's like you break the law in some way and you say, oh, I didn't realise that was it. You don't get off like that, though, do you? I mean, and also...
we have a Prime Minister that literally did that yesterday after having already done that in terms of a Partygate inquiry a while back. So, no, I have to say, when the top person in your society flagrantly breaks the law like that all the time, why is there a duty on anyone else in society to do that? I think there's more law breakers that we should be looking at the moment than a few people who've accidentally overstayed their work visas.
Oh, just a few. Well, there might be a lot more than just a few. And actually, if we follow this to its natural conclusion, we can't then look like we're giving people from the EU a special pass against people who've come here in other ways. Otherwise, hold on, let me finish. Otherwise, sorry, I listened to you. Hang on, wait, sorry. 1 second, 1 second, please. Hold on. You don't know what I'm going to say, so you can't just talk over me. Can you turn his mic down, please, so I can speak? Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll have to do it that way. Well, listen. Thank you. Well, basically, otherwise, if we give people from the EU a special pass because they've come from the EU, they'll most probably be white people, we'll be told that it's because they're not so-called Mohammed or whatever from another country that we're being racist. Well, so everyone should be treated the same way.
Reality that your own investigation uncovered there. Now, if I understand correctly, and please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong there, some people were taken aside based on the fact that they heard a European accent. taken into detention, and then it revealed they did have the correct papers. So if we've got a situation where our own immigration people are just picking up people on the basis of their accent and putting them in a room, frisking them, investigating their credentials, I think that's quite a disturbing thing to do, really, in our society.
Well, we don't have the full details of that. I doubt it was just an accent. I mean, otherwise they'd be arresting absolutely anyone and everyone. That's not quite how it works, and you know that. Let me bring Ben Habib in, because I've got Ben Habib here. He was a former MEP. I know he'll have something to say. Ben, what are you going to say to this?
Well, I would say that we are an incredibly generous nation when it comes to settling people in the United Kingdom, and we were generous with the EU. In fact, we unilaterally declared virtually immediately after the referendum that we would give right to residency to EU member citizens ahead of any agreement, formal agreement. And the EU refused to reciprocate. And it wasn't until we signed the withdrawal agreement that an agreement on that could be reached. And it shows how intransigent and difficult the EU was playing Russian roulette with the working lives of its own citizens in its challenge to the United Kingdom.
I remember that.
We have also, which Richard I'm sure is aware of, have granted pre-settled or settled status to 6.5 million EU member state citizens living in the United Kingdom. If there are still EU member state citizens living here working illegally, they really ought to be deported, like any other person working illegally in the United Kingdom.
Well, what do you say to that, Richard? I mean, he's got an absolute point. They were given plenty of time. So, you know, the 6.5 years or so, they've had plenty of time.
I don't recognise that statistic. I know there are 6.5 million EU citizens in the UK. I don't believe all of them have been given pre-settled status.
Well, pre-settled also, you need to do... You need to veg up on your facts, Richard.
Who are currently being picked up. Yes, of course, there'll be a few people...
It's on .gov.uk.
But I suspect many people are just not aware of their rights. And to take up the point about us being generous in terms of offering full pre-settled status to everybody there, we didn't actually need an EU response from that. If we are such a generous country, then we could be doing that now. And also, let's look at the reality.
People have broken the law and gone beyond their remit
that we've got at the moment. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to talk.
That's all right. That's what you learned from the first time. Well done. No, I said not if people have broken the law, though. If they've broken the law, they need to follow the normal procedures, especially when they've been given plenty of time and warning. You said that some of them may not know about it. Well, they could do a bit of research. That's what they have to do. If you don't do that, then fair enough. That's the way the cookie crumbles, surely.
Well, again, not everyone watches GB News, not everyone keeps up with the news, not everyone is aware of what's going on in our day-to-day lives. I would be interested to know a few more details about those people from Romania who were arrested. As you said, it was 2 people. That's a very, very small sample size, if that's correct. Now, I'm not saying there's only 2 people in the country there, but I'd like to know what their backgrounds are. I'd like to know whether they have reason to suspect that they could work legally, and that reason not to have been properly explained to them. Also, I noticed the employers don't seem to be being arrested for this. I thought quite a lot of the onus was on the employer to verify that people were able and fit to work. And again, it does seem like it might be one rule for an immigrant and one rule for someone else.
Well, Richard, I don't know whether we know where they worked or anything, but that's just what we have is just a little bit of information, but we'll bring back more. Do you think, then, that we should be allowing more unskilled labour from Europe, bearing in mind one of the main reasons for Brexit was
to be honest, the only words I disagree with there are from Europe. I think we need more immigration in this country in general. And I think it's about time we started having a real debate about immigration. Sorry.
But specifically from Europe.
Sound like my end means I speak over you.
That's all right. Look at him, he's very good. You saw what happened the first time, didn't you, Richard? You'll never do it again.
Pavlov.
Yes. So if we just look at the European market, though, do you think that we should, you said overall, specifically from Europe, should we really be looking to bring in more labour, seeing as we have such a big shortage in this country?
Well, again, Europe is suffering some of the sort of same socio-demographic time bombs that we are in the UK. We need immigrants in the UK. People of my age group, we're soon going to be retired, and there's a lot more of people in my age group than there are in the age groups below, and that is going to put a huge stress on our economic system. Our reproduction rate in the UK is now down to 1.75. So even without infant mortality, we'll only have 5 people in the next generation for every 6 that we've got now. So the bottom line is we need immigration in this country. We need immigration to support our health service, to support our teaching industries, to support our farming industries. And obviously the EU is a good source of that. But the EU, of course, is also suffering similar situations, not quite so bad demographically as the UK, but it's also under a lot of pressure. So this is a much wider debate, I think, and I think we need to fess up to the fact that as a nation, we need immigrants.
Well, I mean, Greta Thunberg will be pleased there's fewer people on the planet to destroy it. Listen, Richard, thank you very much for joining me. That's Richard Hewson. He's the leader of Rejoin EU Party. Ben, what do you think? Has he got a point?
Well, no, I don't think he's got a point at all. I mean, we have a record number of people on universal credit at the moment. The government argues we've got record low unemployment, but that's only because unemployment figures only measure those who are looking for a job. We've actually got a vast pool of people from whom we could get back into the workforce. The problem we've got in the UK is not one of lack of immigration. What we've got a problem in the UK with is an addiction to cheap, unskilled labour, large corporations not willing to upskill, not wishing to increase productivity through automation, a reluctance of the government and corporations to actually pay proper wages, a reluctance from the government to cut taxes. Because if you cut taxes on people, it pays to work. You then wish to work. But at the moment, you can get nearly as much on benefits as you can going into the workplace. So people are sitting at home, not going into the workplace, getting the benefit of wealth distribution from the government, and then people like Richard feel able to say, well, we've got an absence of people looking for jobs, so we've got to get unskilled labour from Europe. And what he's advocating, if you listen to him very carefully, what he's advocating is a Ponzi scheme. He's saying the only way to grow is ever bigger population. We're not breeding fast enough.
Well, that's exactly it. And our whole point of that was that we are overpopulated in any case, and that is one of the big drivers of the planet, us destroying the planet, of course.
Absolutely. And the route to wealth is not increases in GDP. The route to wealth is increase in GDP per capita and per hour worked, which is productivity.
Right, well, thank you for that, Ben, and I'm with you because lots of people have been getting in touch with their thoughts on the illegal immigration that we were discussing. Angie says it's a shame so much effort can be put into catching a few illegal workers, but not to stop them coming here in the first place. If the lorry drivers can be fined 10 grand for inadvertently bringing illegal immigrants into the UK, Border Force and RNLI should also be fined for bringing them here. I can sort of see the logic there. I hear you. Ian says catching and deporting illegal immigrants is all well and good, but surely it's better to prevent them from reaching our shores in the first place. Rishi Sunak must get the Royal Navy to patrol the Channel and return all illegal immigrants to the French coast. Excuses are not an option. Yeah, that's for the ones who are who've come via the boats. I'm with you there, but we were basically looking at people who've actually overstayed their visa. They're EU. They had a chance to become a British citizen or to be, into this community, but they chose not to do it. So we're catching people who've been given about 6.5 years to become citizens. Right, we're moving on. King Charles and the Queen Consort Camilla are visiting Bolton today, and it's part of the celebration of the 150th anniversary of Bolton Town Hall. It's Charles's first visit to the region as king. However, he did hold several major engagements in Greater Manchester whilst he was still Prince Charles. Our royal reporter Cameron Walker has been in Bolton following proceedings. Cameron, what's been going on? What's the latest?
Well, Nana, it's been a busy day of engagements here in Greater Manchester for the King and Queen Consort. First of all, the King visited the GCHQ Northwestern Hub. He travelled on Royal Train, actually, to get to this area. It's the first time he's used the Royal Train as monarch. He also visited the Kellogg's factory to mark their 100th anniversary of having a presence here in the United Kingdom. Kellogg's actually has a royal warrant, which means it provides the breakfast cereal for the royal household. So perhaps that was one of the reasons why King Charles chose to visit. But arguably the main event was here at Bolton Town Hall to mark the 150th anniversary of its opening. It was King Charles's great-great-grandfather, Edward VII, when he was Prince of Wales in 1878, who actually opened it in front of a crowd of 150,000 people. Now, there weren't that many people here today. I reckon there was 2,000 or 3,000 people here, but 150 uniformed children were on the steps ready to greet King Charles, and every primary school in Bolton was invited to officially welcome King Charles and Queen Consort Camilla. And I caught up with a head teacher and a few pupils, and this is what they had to say a little bit earlier on.
We had an email on Tuesday inviting the head teacher and 3 children. So we had to reply, so we replied within 10 minutes saying absolutely we can't wait. I'm a bit of a royal fan, so we couldn't wait. So we've had some flowers made for Camilla. We haven't given her them yet. We're hoping when she comes out maybe we'll have another chance, but we don't know.
Oh, wow. So,
yes.
Oliver, what was it like seeing the King and Queen Consort?
Very exciting. It's really a one-in-a-lifetime chance, isn't it?
He shook your hand, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
And what did he say to you?
He said, is it cold? Lovely to meet you, and have you missed your lunch?
Well, I am reliably informed that they had an early lunch before they came here to Bolton Town Hall to see the King and Queen Consorts. Well, when their Majesties left, they visited Norbrook Community Centre in Wythenshawe to a sports and community to see the sports and community facilities there. The King met England football manager Gareth Southgate. He met young people taking part in Prince's Trust programmes. And the Queen Consort also visited a few more school children at this community centre. She was championing one of her passions, actually, which is that of children's literacy and getting and encouraging children to learn to read and to read novels. So all in all, it was a long day of engagements, but it's very much the King and Queen Consort focusing on their work as the heads, really, of the royal family ahead of a coronation in a few months' time.
Well, Cameron, thank you very much for that. That's Cameron Walker, our GB News reporter. You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. Coming up, Western allies meet to discuss further military support for Ukraine. We'll have the latest. Before that, let's take a look at the weather.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGibbon from the Met Office. It's a beautiful afternoon out there for most of us. Sunny skies, crisp winter sunshine. But another frosty night follows for the vast majority. Not for all, however. Changes are afoot. This area of mild air coming in from the west will slowly topple into northwestern areas during the start of the weekend, bringing cloud, rain and increased wind, but also milder conditions. However, for the evening, for many, it's clear skies and light winds and temperatures falling away, a widespread frost forming. Temperatures as low as -3, -4 Celsius widely, and as low as -7 to -10 Celsius for some sheltered parts of Scotland, northern England. But we'll also see some freezing fog patches first thing. These will be slow to clear across central and southern parts of the UK. Now for western Scotland and Northern Ireland, a complete contrast. It's frost-free first thing here, but also cloudy, damp and breezy. Gales around exposed western shores of Scotland, and those gales pushing into the Northern Isles by the afternoon. As the rain moves east over the cold air, there's the risk of freezing rain for a time for the Grampians and some flakes of snow as well. But further south, well, it's another sparkling winter's day. England and Wales seeing plenty of sunshine, 5 or 6 Celsius, up to 9 Celsius in the far northwest of Scotland, but it turns even more unsettled here on Saturday night. Wind and rain pushing in, some heavy and persistent rain for Northern Ireland as well as western Scotland, and those outbreaks of rain reaching parts of Wales and western England by the end of the night. So frost-free as we begin Sunday in the west, but for southeastern parts of the UK, well, that's where the coldest weather will be on Sunday morning. Freezing fog once again and a widespread frost, -3, -4 degrees. Now for London, East Anglia and the southeast, Sunday's looking like another bright but cold day, and we keep the cold air actually into the start of next week in the southeast, but for the rest of the UK it's milder, it's cloudier and it's breezier.
On Mark Dolan tonight in a world exclusive, Katie Price joins us live to talk fame, love, money, plastic surgery and her hopes for the future.
Get tuned in as for GB News. I'm meeting up with my old mate, Mark Dolan. It's been ages since I've done an interview with him.
That's Katie Price on Mark Dolan tonight on GB News.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News.
Frank,
fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio,
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome on board. It's just coming up to 27 minutes after 4 o'clock. You're watching or listening to GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akwe. I'm in for Patrick Christys. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on my discussion with Richard Hewison. Now, Richard is very pro-Europe. Shelley says Richard is very wrong in what he says. These people have not accidentally overstayed their visa. They are here illegally, and the law is clear that people needed to apply for settled or pre-settled status. Andrew says, I must have seen 500 adverts aimed at EU passport holders advising them to register for UK residency, and 6.5 million did. If they have overstayed their welcome and not applied for UK residency, it's their fault. And of course, all this is in response to our GB News exclusive, where a couple of Romanians were caught having outstayed their visas. They were EU citizens. Shelley says, I wish you had turned off Richard Hewison's microphone permanently. I know, but we did train him in the end, didn't we? And Mike says we do need immigration, but it has to be legal immigration. Absolutely, 100%. Nobody's saying no immigration. We're just saying follow the rules. That's what everybody else has to do. Moving on, now, Western military leaders are meeting at Ramstein Air Base in Germany today to discuss further military assistance for Ukraine. Now, the meeting comes after Western allies are believed to be putting pressure on Germany to allow the export of Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. The UK is providing 14 Challenger 2 tanks to the country, and several other countries have pledged to send air defence systems. Catherine Forster, our GB News political reporter, joins me from Westminster. Catherine, can you give us an update? What's the latest?
Well, Germany are still, unfortunately for Ukraine, dragging their heels over this decision of whether or not they will send their Leopard 2 tanks. Now, Volodymyr Zelensky appealed to them this morning, said, we have to speed up. It is in your power. Now, of course, Britain, we've already pledged 14 Challenger 2 tanks. Those are the first modern battle tanks to go to Ukraine. France are also sending tanks. But the involvement of Germany could be critical because these Leopard 2 tanks are easy to maintain, easy to get parts. They're widely used across Europe by about a dozen countries. But at the moment, Germany is still considering its options. It's saying that no decision has been made. And not only does that create a problem, but also other countries that have these tanks, like Poland, and would like to send them, can't send them without the permission of Germany, although Poland are now saying that they might send them at permission or no permission.
I think the word they used was with their blessing they were after, but I don't think they said they would do it with or without. Now, I'm wondering, though, if Germany hold off and don't allow people to send these tanks, then where are we with this conflict? Because that is a concern. If Germany carry on, how long have we got until things get a bit, till sort of for Russia to kind of recoup and get more, get sort of more men and troops and everything. I mean, we haven't got long, have we, surely?
Well, obviously, there's been a little bit of a lull during winter because battle is very difficult. But as the weather starts to improve in another month or so, as we begin spring, then Russia will likely advance again. And so Ukraine needs these tanks and wants to have them in place and its people trained to use them now. But Germany's hesitancy really is, well, apart from a long-stemming desire not to get involved and having been rather close to Germany to Russia, for many, many years. But also they don't want to be seen to be leading the charge on this, not that there's really any risk of that. They really want America to send tanks. They've basically said, I will if you will, and America has said, well, we're giving $2.6 billion of military aid already, but we're not giving tanks for various technical reasons. And Germany, as a sovereign country, you need to stand on your own 2 feet and make this decision yourself. But these tanks really are the ones that Zelensky needs and wants most. So they will be hoping that Germany will move soon. And of course, all this division between Western allies is really probably what Putin is looking for and will be looking on and pleased with what he's seeing at the moment.
Well, of course, Vladimir Zelensky, he lost his temper, didn't he? And he said in plain language, can you deliver leopards or not? He said, then hand them over. Well, how was that speech received?
Well, a lot of Western nations are really keen to give the green light to this, and they do realise that time is critical. But one thing I think worth noting is that the German defence minister is very, very new to the post. He's literally just been appointed. He's called Boris Pistorius. He's never been in the military. He's never held national office until this point, but he's a stalwart of Olaf Scholz's SDP party. He was, up until this point, Minister of the Interior and Sport for the state of Lower Saxony. So certainly not the safe pair of hands that we have in Ben Wallace, who has been a point of stability and strength with this conflict going back to when Russia first invaded.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine. That's Catherine Forster. She's our GBNews political reporter. Well, it's just coming up to 33 minutes after 4 o'clock. You're with me. I'm Nana Akwe, in for Patrick Christys on GB News. Next up, Rishi Sunak has said sorry. The police say that they're investigating the case of the Prime Minister's seatbelt after the video emerged of him not wearing one, a video that he posted of himself. That was for a social media video whilst he was a passenger in a moving car. We'll discuss that after your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. Next month, we'll see the biggest strike action ever to hit the NHS after Unite announced 10 further days of industrial action by ambulance workers in the coming weeks. Members of the Unite Union are joining 10,000 ambulance staff with the GMB Union, along with the Royal College of Nursing, in joint action on the 6th of February. The workers across England, Wales and Northern Ireland are walking out in a long-running dispute over pay and staffing. Downing Street says it's disappointed, but that they're open to further discussions. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has held talks with around 50 Western nations, urging them to give more military aid to support their fight against Russia. Kyiv has requested 300 tanks, including Germany's highly regarded Leopard 2 tanks. Germany's defence minister says they're ready to move quickly should an agreement be reached with their allies, while the US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin has commended the UK for agreeing to send their Challenger 2 tanks to the war-torn country. A new report into England's fire and rescue services says reforms are needed as a matter of urgency. The watchdog says just 2 of the 6 recommendations made by the Chief Inspectorate have been fulfilled. In an annual report, the Chief Inspector, Andy Cook, says he's frustrated at the lack of progress made since inspections started in 2018. Counter-terrorism police say the 27-year-old man arrested earlier today over a security scare at St James's Hospital in Leeds has been arrested on suspicion of firearms and explosives offences. Emergency services, including a bomb disposal unit, were called to St James's this morning after a suspicious package was found on the maternity wing. A cordon is still in place around the hospital and people are being asked to avoid the entrance. And the controversial influencer Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan will remain in police custody for a further 30 days until the 27th of February after a court in Romania extended their detention. The pair are being investigated over allegations of sexual assault and exploitation. A judge has decided they'll remain in prison for longer while police continue to investigate. The self-proclaimed misogynist was arrested in Bucharest on the 29th of December. TV, online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stumped. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Good afternoon. It's fast approaching 39 minutes after 4 o'clock. If you've just tuned in, welcome on board. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Don't forget as well, you can stream us live on YouTube. I'm Nana Akoya. Now, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has apologised after a video posted to social media appeared to show him not wearing a seatbelt in the back of a moving car.
To grow the economy, and today we're announcing the second round of allocations from our Levelling Up Fund. And that's about investing in local areas in order to create jobs and help deliver on that promise to boost growth.
Oh dear. Well, the Prime Minister said that the incident was a brief error of judgment, but Lancashire Police have announced that they'll be looking into it. Well, with me now is GB News' political reporter Olivia Utley. Olivia, should Sunak be worried?
Well, it's a sort of ludicrous own goal from Rishi Sunak. Apparently, he took off his seatbelt to film the video, which just seems a little bit ridiculous. Worst case scenario, he gets fined £100 by Lancashire Police. Obviously, that's not a massive problem legally or anything, but it will put political pressure on him. Labour will point out that it's the second time that he's been fined. I mean, as a side note, I find it quite funny the way Rishi Sunak, who comes across as a pretty straight-laced sort of a man, keeps getting fined for very rebellious breakings of the law, because first there were the drinking in a party during lockdown, and now this. But really, from a wider perspective, if you just sort of zoom out a bit, it's just beginning to feel as though Rishi Sunak is scoring these own goals. He was up in Lancashire doing this, handing out money for a levelling up fund. It should have been a really easy trip for him. It should have been an easy political win, and he's made it difficult for himself. Meanwhile, you've got Labour shadow cabinet members coming out day after day with huge reforms to their sectors. So we saw Jonathan Ashworth a couple of weeks ago, Bridget Phillipson, Shadow Education Secretary, doing serious childcare reform plans. Nick Thomas-Symonds today talking about the clean energy plan. And it's just, from the outside, you can imagine voters beginning to feel as though Labour is looking like a credible electoral option and the Conservatives are looking a little bit silly.
Well, it feels a bit like do as I say, not as I do. I mean, there he was with his reasonably priced car, which wasn't his car, filling up, which he didn't appear to know how to fill up a tank of fuel, didn't appear to know how to use any of the, with the contactless, because obviously it doesn't appear that he ever pays for anything. And then, going to a place where people are in poverty in Prada shoes, and there he is now sitting there without the seatbelt, which he says that he took off to film. But why would you do that? Nobody would. So it's basically, doesn't it start to feel like they seem to have a sense of entitlement, is what seems to be coming across to me.
Well, I think that Rishi Sunak's team will be, head in hands about this, because, yes, that is exactly the impression that they want to avoid. It was always a sort of political risk having such a wealthy person as Prime Minister. And during the first COVID lockdown, for example, Rishi Sunak came across as enormously slick. He was really well liked. He came out with these PR stunts and they were pulled off very sleekly. He seems to have lost that touch, and that is a big problem for him and his team, because that was the way to sort of differentiate him from Keir Starmer. Both men are thought, but this is what you're hearing, this is what I'm hearing from inside Labour and Conservative camps. The worry is that they both know that their man is a little bit boring, really, but the hope is that they can, differentiate themselves. And Keir Starmer's doing that by coming up with this big reforming agenda. Rishi Sunak's answer to that seems to be to do these slick PR stunts, but if he can't pull them off, then he's got absolutely no chance.
Well, let's bring in Ben Habib. Ben, I mean, do these people, they seem to be coming across as though they're very detached from the reality in the real world that we all live in, the rules that we all have to abide by. It's coming across now that they're not even bothered about following those rules. They're, in fact, so unaware was he that he wasn't following the rules that he was prepared to film himself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Olivia's absolutely right. There's a kind of disconnect, isn't there? And there's an inability to appear genuine and to deliver the message genuinely. This should have been a fantastic moment for the Prime Minister. Eventually they're talking about specifics on levelling up, not just a sort of general concept. I don't want to get into the specifics of their policy, which I think are bad, but, why did he screw that up by taking his seatbelt off? And secondly, and I think this is a big differentiator between Sunak and Johnson, and I was a vocal critic of Johnson and I'm a vocal critic of Sunak, but Johnson always spoke at least as if he believed it. It came from the heart. When Johnson spoke, he connected with everyone, up and down the social spectrum, the age spectrum. Everyone could understand Johnson. Sunak is really wooden. You see him in PMQs, he's very good in PMQs. He's very good in a combative question and answer session. He's hopeless at disclosing new policy. And that really ought to be where his passion is, setting out the path for the recovery of the United Kingdom. And you saw how wooden he was in the car, seatbelt off or on. He was incredibly wooden, wasn't he? And he was when he did his 5-point plan, which is meant to, save the nation in 2023.
And the 5-point plan, out of which many of those things would happen anyway.
Yeah, and some may never happen because he never put a deadline on them.
Well, that's right.
Like stopping the votes.
Which is always often the way with these people, sadly. Well, Olivia, thank you very much for joining me. Olivia Utley and Ben Habib. Right, now, moving on to this story. New Mexico's District Attorney Office has said that actor Alec Baldwin will be charged with involuntary manslaughter over the fatal shooting of a cinematographer last year. Helena Hutchins was killed and director Joel Souza injured in the set of the film Rust when a pop gun Baldwin was using during a rehearsal fired a live bullet. Baldwin has said that he was told the gun was safe and that he didn't pull the trigger. He sued crew members for negligence over the incident. Well, with me now is Kinsey Schofield, Showbiz reporter. Kinsey, thank you very much for joining me all the way from the States. What is going on?
Well, I think, Nana, what we're seeing is a result of Alec Baldwin insisting to go on national television here in the United States repeatedly, pleading towards the court of public opinion versus allowing the district attorney and prosecutor to, patiently organize this case review. They have over 600 items that they reviewed, and it took them 15 months to put this together. And I think at the end of the day, it really hurt him that he insisted, went on television and did these interviews, demanding that people cut him some slack instead of being empathetic and apologizing for this horrific incident.
Does seem a bit of a strange way to go about it, but it felt like the story had quietened down. I mean, didn't he pay them some compensation? Was there some money that changed hands at some point?
Now, that was the civil issue, and that is not a criminal issue. So with the civil issue, he did settle along with the production. And what was so interesting about that particular situation was that Helena's husband, upon the settling, also came on as a producer of the film so it could be completed. Will all of that be in jeopardy now that criminal charges have been filed? I think so. I absolutely think so. And there was 2 additional people that were charged with the exact same charges. One was the prop master and the other was the assistant director. Now, the assistant director has taken a plea deal and has agreed to testify against the prop master and Alec Baldwin.
Wow, so it's getting very messy. But it just seems very odd that a live round would end up in a gun that is supposed to be fired. I mean, it just seems a bit of an odd situation, but obviously it's under live investigation, so we won't go into it too much. And what are the American public, what is their sense of it? Because obviously Alec Baldwin is out there trying to get their sympathy. What are you hearing? Are people feeling sorry for him in this respect?
Well, really quickly, I'll address the live round. This was a set that was plagued with problems, plagued with security problems, plagued with people quitting and complaining. And Alec Baldwin was aware of that as a producer as well as a star. And that is one of the reasons why the district attorney said, we are charging you not only as an actor, but as a producer, because as a producer, it's your role to protect. But I think the American public, I don't think they sympathize with him. I think that they certainly wish that they saw more they saw more sadness from him versus the defiance that we see.
Yeah, I mean, but that would be terrible then, because it feels, I don't know, I mean, this is an interesting case. We will stay close to that one, Kinsey, and hopefully you will keep us updated, won't you? Thank you very much, Kinsey. Thank you so much. That's Kinsey Schofield. She's a Showbiz reporter. She's there in America. Well, retail sales dropped by 1% in December. That is according to new figures from the Office for National Statistics. Retailers stated that consumers were cutting back on costs and preferring affordable options over financial concerns. Experts have predicted a 0.5% rise, but the month was tougher than many expected. Of course, it's January. Ben, what do you make of the ONS figures?
Well, I mean, they're telling. And the other stat, which you didn't mention, is that sales in 2022 were down 3% on 2021. And remember, 2022 was the year we were meant to be coming out from lockdowns, economies would start recovering. And actually, that's the biggest reduction in consumer sales since records began in 1997. Wow. That's a big hit to the economy. And I know everyone's kind of punching the air with delight that we grew by 0.1% in November, which, by the way, is a rounding error and could be revised downwards, when they do the detailed numbers. And inflation is beginning to come down. But that collapse in spending, the collapse in spending in 2022, should be sending alarm bells to Andrew Bailey at the Bank of England. They've come down, they've borne very heavily down on inflation, raising interest rates, which you could argue
don't have any effect.
Don't have any. I'm so glad you said that.
It's a global thing. It's got nothing to do. This is a domestic thing.
Absolutely. What do interest rates do? They prevent you from buying housing. This wasn't a housing problem.
It's got nothing to do.
This was buying fuel to heat your home and buy eggs to feed your family. And that interest rates have no bearing on that. So what we're seeing actually is people cutting back on staples, on absolute basic requirements are being cut back on. And what I would say to Andrew Bailey is he's got to rein back on the interest rates. He's got to let the economy start growing. And it ought also to be a signal to Sunak and to Hunt that they've got to let wages rise. You know, they are going to kill the economy. If you've got a Bank of England that's out of control with interest rates, I'm not saying they're out of control, but they're certainly putting their foot to the floor, as it were, and you've got a government that's also tightening at the same time, growth is going to go... People keep talking about us avoiding a recession. I don't think that's possible.
Well, I mean, what's happening is I did it the other day. I went through my statements to see what I was wasting money on and started to cut back, and that is what everybody's doing. And that affects growth.
Absolutely.
That's what's happening. I don't understand why they would think, let's raise interest rates so that people spend more on their mortgages. So the only people that feel like they're profiteering here are the banks in this one.
Well, the banks are definitely making money.
They're not passing the interest rates to the savings accounts, are they?
You're absolutely... My saving account hasn't gone up in interest at all. No. The banks are creaming it right now. And, you know, it's just not a good look, is it, that this is happening at a time when the cost of living crisis is affecting so many right across the board. Of course, the working and middle classes the most. Yet again, it's always the working and middle classes who pick up the tab. I don't want to digress, but ULEZ hits them the hardest. Congestion charge hits them the hardest. Increase in tube fares hit them the hardest. And, you know, this is a nationwide phenomenon. So we've got to go for growth. And this is where, again, I'm digressing, but I think it's important to make the point. This is where Liz Truss really got it. We've got to go for growth.
But unfortunately, what has happened to Liz Truss? I'd like to have a chat with her. Well, maybe she will. I'll ask her at some point. Maybe appear on GB News. But now it's time for our GB News People's Poll. So this week we've been asking you about the big gender debate. A vast majority of you said 16-year-olds are too young to change their gender. 41% completely agreed that it's too young, whilst just 8% said they completely disagreed. We also revealed that 22% of the public strongly support the government's blocking of the controversial gender reform bill. Ben Habib, that is the stats. We talked about it earlier.
Yeah.
We spoke to Peter Tatchell. What's your view on all of that?
So, just to repeat a bit of what I said last time, there are just under a quarter of a million people who are transgender in the United Kingdom. That equates to about 0.4% of our population. Less than 2,000 people transgender every year. This is not a mainstream issue. And for me, this is a really good example of where woke manifests itself in our society. So woke, I define woke as the ostensible championing of minority rights at the exclusion and often the detriment of the majority. You get very vocal minorities who make a big argument for their position. And actually what they end up doing is inculcating division between themselves and the majority, often doing their own case damage. And what we've got here is a classic example. Legislation from Scotland, which wasn't necessary. No one was calling for it. It wasn't a big problem in society. And then all of a sudden, you've got Westminster reacting to it. And before you know it, for an issue that affects a very small number of people, you've got a constitutional crisis.
Well, it's affecting... and you've got a constitutional crisis that will affect a lot of people. And to be honest, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on the transgender issue. Mel says, I believe we need to see this as a psychological problem, not a medical one. And I'd 100% agree with that. Of course it is. If you think that you're in the wrong body...
Yeah, you've got a mental health issue.
Potentially. I mean, that's what I think it is. But what am I? I'm not a doctor. This is just my honest and humble opinion, and yours too, Ben, and many others. Steve says, I don't believe it is possible to change your biological sex. So for me, the Scottish Bill is merely pandering to those with mental illness. Another person who thinks the same thing. I mean, look, and at the expense of women as well, which is worrying.
Well, I mean, and this is where I mean how it works against the majority. You know, all of a sudden, the majority, and in this case women in particular, have to tolerate transgender people coming into their loos and potentially, you know, posing a threat to them.
I could tolerate that potentially, but my worry is the extension of this to absolutely anybody who might have a penchant for just actually...
Including single-sex prisons and all that kind of thing. They might even be in jail for sexual offences, and they'll actually be put in a jail with women. I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, also,
it's daft as brushes.
Well, also in terms of rape, if you cannot rape a woman can't rape a woman, so therefore that would wouldn't be someone who did that, if they were doing that specifically to do that, wouldn't be able to be charged with rape. Well, on Rishi Sunak being filmed without a seatbelt, Mick says, I can't be the only one who couldn't care less about whether or not he was filmed without a seatbelt. Well, no, that's not the point, though. He's breaking the law. And Melbourne says, are we now going to start calling this seatbelt gate? Why not? I think that's a good idea. Well, if you just joined me, you're with me. I'm Nana Aquid. This is GB News. Loads more still to come in the next hour. Stay tuned. Don't forget, email us, gbviews@gbnews.uk. That's on the way. First of all, let's get you some weather.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGibbon from the Met Office. It's a beautiful afternoon out there for most of us. Sunny skies, crisp winter sunshine. But another frosty night follows for the vast majority. Not for all, however. Changes are afoot. This area of mild air coming in from the west will slowly topple into northwestern areas during the start of the weekend, bringing cloud, rain and increased wind, but also milder conditions. However, for the evening, for many, it's clear skies and light winds and temperatures falling away, a widespread frost forming. Temperatures as low as -3, -4 Celsius widely, and as low as -7 to -10 Celsius for some sheltered parts of Scotland, northern England. But we'll also see some freezing fog patches first thing. These will be slow to clear across central and southern parts of the UK. Now for western Scotland and Northern Ireland, a complete contrast. It's frost-free first thing here, but also cloudy, damp and breezy. Gales around exposed western shores of Scotland, and those gales pushing into the Northern Isles by the afternoon. As the rain moves east over the cold air, there's the risk of freezing rain for a time for the Grampians and some flakes of snow as well. But further south, well, it's another sparkling winter's day. England and Wales seeing plenty of sunshine, 5 or 6 Celsius, up to 9 Celsius in the far northwest of Scotland, but it turns even more unsettled here on Saturday night. Wind and rain pushing in, some heavy and persistent rain for Northern Ireland as well as western Scotland, and those outbreaks of rain reaching parts of Wales and western England by the end of the night. So frost-free as we begin Sunday in the west, but for southeastern parts of the UK, well, that's where the coldest weather will be on Sunday morning. Freezing fog once again and a widespread frost, -3, -4 degrees. Now for London, East Anglia and the southeast, Sunday's looking like another bright but cold day, and we keep the cold air actually into the start of next week in the southeast, but for the rest of the UK it's milder, it's cloudier and it's breezier.
On Mark Dolan tonight, in a world exclusive, Katie Price joins us live to talk fame, love, money, plastic surgery and her hopes for the future.
Get tuned in as for GB News. I'm meeting up with my old mate, Mark Dolan. It's been ages since I've done an interview with him.
That's Katie Price on Mark Dolan tonight on GB News.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
It has just gone 5 o'clock. Welcome on board. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Aquia. I'm in for Patrick Christys. I'll be back tomorrow, though, for my own show. So that's between 4 and 5. At 4 and 6 o'clock, or I could stay with me for that. But coming up this hour, we'll be bringing you a GB News exclusive. EU citizens living and working in the UK without a visa now face a very real prospect of arrest. And we've been given exclusive access to follow immigration officers raiding businesses in London with staff who immigration officials claim were housing workers in the UK without the proper documentation. So are Border Force officials right to take such a tough line on EU workers who were here illegally? We'll discuss that next. Then the NHS is facing a near shutdown on February the 6th. That's after the Union Unite announced industrial action for ambulance workers in England and Wales. It'll mean that coordinated action from emergency responders and nurses on the same day. 4 of the new dates announced will coincide with industrial action from the GMB Union for emergency responders. And it means that the NHS will face major disruption to ambulance services in the coming months. And the world's defence leaders convened at Ramstein in Germany in a bid to resolve disagreement over tanks for Ukraine. The UK has agreed to send Challenger 2 tanks to the war zone, but German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is wary of handing over its own fighting vehicles, and that's for fear of angering Vladimir Putin. We'll bring you the latest from the conference. And joining me throughout the show today to give you his take on all the topics we're discussing is former Brexit Party MEP Ben Habib. As ever, you can get in touch. Email gbnews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The NHS will see the biggest strike action ever in the industry next month, as the Unite Union announced 10 further days of industrial action by ambulance workers in the coming weeks. They join 10,000 ambulance staff with the GMB Union, along with the Royal College of Nursing, in joint action on the 6th of February. The workers across England, Wales and Northern Ireland are walking out in a long-running dispute over pay and staffing. Downing Street says it's disappointed, but they're open to further discussions. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is holding talks with around 50 Western nations, urging them to give more military aid to support their fight against Russia. Kyiv has requested 300 tanks. Germany's defence minister says they're ready to move quickly to provide their highly regarded Leopard 2s should an agreement be reached with their allies. Meanwhile, the US announced a further £2 billion worth of support for the war-torn country. The US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin has commended the UK for agreeing to supply British Army Challenger 2 tanks.
All of today's announcements are direct results of our work at the Contact Group. And these important new commitments demonstrate the ongoing resolve of our allies and partners to help Ukraine defend itself. Because this isn't just about Ukraine's security, it's also about European security, and it's about global security.
A new report into England's fire and rescue services says reforms are needed as a matter of urgency. The watchdog says just 2 of the 6 recommendations made by the Chief Inspectorate have been fulfilled. In an annual report, the Chief Inspector, Andy Cook, says he's frustrated at the lack of progress made since inspections started in 2018. But the Chief Fire Officer at Leicester Fire and Rescue, Callum Faint, says he's confident the force is improving.
A really good report for us. It shows the advancements we've made over the last 3 years. Whilst we accept the feedback from the previous report, we were slightly disappointed in it, and we as a service have responded as a whole. Leicestershire Fire and Rescue Service is the 4th best at delivering the sheer number of home fire safety checks. What we have got a little bit of work to do is the number of referrals coming in from our partners is incredibly high, and we need to make sure we get the right amount of resources to address those home fire safety checks. I'm really confident by the time of the next inspection we will be at a good level across the board of all areas that are assessed by HMI CRFS.
A 19-year-old has pleaded guilty to plotting an Islamist terror attack, allegedly targeting police officers or military personnel. Matthew King appeared at the Old Bailey this morning. He's alleged to have carried out surveillance at police stations, railway stations, a magistrate's court and a British Army barracks. Authorities had been tipped off about King through an anti-terrorist hotline after he posted a video on a WhatsApp group. The Met Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, has published his plan to improve standards and rebuild trust in the police force. Mr Rowley said the next 2 years are critical, from adopting new technologies and methods to achieving their goals and investing in their people. It comes as the National Police Chiefs Council are also urging police chiefs right across England and Wales to have all officers checked against national databases by the end of March. It comes in the wake of the crimes committed by the former police officer David Carrick, who admitted to 49 criminal charges, including 24 counts of rape. The Home Office says survivors of rape are having significant amounts of their personal records unnecessarily requested by police during investigations. In some cases, records have been used to test the credibility of survivors, which ministers describe as invasive. The government's vowed to change the law to better protect victims, speed up inquiries and restore confidence in the criminal justice system. MP Sarah Dine says these record requests are often irrelevant to the inquiry.
Quite often that's people like schools, educational records, even at times counselling records, and these organisations take a long time to respond. It undermines the trust of the rape victim in the process, and as time goes on, sometimes they fall away from the process altogether. No, we don't want that. We want to rebuild trust to make sure that every rape victim is treated fairly and gets to a fair trial in a decent amount of time.
High-profile social media influencer Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan will remain in custody for a further 30 days until the 27th of February, after a court in Romania has extended their police detention. The pair are being investigated over allegations of sexual assault and exploitation. A judge has decided they'll remain in prison for longer while police continue to investigate. The self-proclaimed misogynist was arrested in Bucharest on December the 29th. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Nana Akwe.
Good afternoon. It's just coming up to 8 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akwe. Don't forget as well, you can stream us live on YouTube. Now, EU citizens living and working in the UK without a visa now face the real prospect of arrest. GB News can reveal that immigration enforcement officers have been issued with new guidance that's allowing for the detention and removal of those EU nationals who are working here illegally. Our Home and Security editor Mark White and his team were given exclusive access to follow immigration officers as they raided businesses in London, arresting 2 EU citizens from Romania whose officers said were in the UK without work visas.
We're on board with immigration officers in South East London as they prepare to raid several businesses suspected of employing illegal immigrants. Arriving at this skip hire firm, these officers have to move fast if they're to stop their suspects disappearing. Searching all the possible hiding places as they go. Among those they're looking for, at least 2 Albanians. Immigration enforcement officers believe one of the men has run off.
Yeah, have you got a picture of it?
The other is behind the wheel of this vehicle, but a quick check reveals he has a proper work visa. Elsewhere, the rest of the workforce have gathered in this porta-cabin as immigration officers check their status.
We're going to take you into this room and just speak to you in here, yeah?
After speaking to this Romanian, he was placed under arrest on suspicion of working in the UK without a proper visa. The senior immigration enforcement officer here told us they've now been issued with new guidance, allowing for the arrest of EU nationals living and working here illegally. Conservative MP Lee Anderson, who's on the Commons Home Affairs Select Committee, welcomed this apparent change in policy.
Well, it's welcome news, because if EU citizens are here and they are working and they should not be working, then quite frankly they're breaking the law. And this problem is much bigger than we think, I believe. I believe that this is happening up and down the country, in every town and village and city. There's a hidden population of people who are working that should not be working.
Following Brexit, EU nationals arriving in the UK must have the appropriate visas if they want to live and work here. And although border officials have detained some EU nationals at ports and airports they suspect of planning to work here illegally, those EU citizens already in the UK but working without permission have not been pursued by immigration enforcement until now. At a second nearby business, immigration officers have arrested another Romanian suspected of working illegally. It signals a tougher approach from Rishi Sunak's government after he promised to crack down on those abusing UK immigration laws. But with well over 1 million people suspected of living and working in the illegal economy, these immigration enforcement officers have never been busier. Mark White, GB News, South East London.
God, I wish they put that much effort into sort of getting our people within this country into work, honestly. Right, let's speak to Shoaib Khan, who is a human rights lawyer. Shoaib, what do you make of this shift in policy?
I mean, obviously there are, quite grave concerns about some of this. I don't think it's necessarily a shift in policy. Obviously, the law has always been that, if you don't have a visa to work here and you're working here, that's illegal. You can be detained at any time, you can be deported at any time, you can be apprehended, you can be arrested. But I think it does, give concern. There are huge concerns that it gives rise to. I mean, for instance, just even in this clip that we saw that one person who in fact did have the correct papers, did have status, actually hid. And because that's the thing, I mean, the incompetence of the government, the incompetence of the Home Office doesn't give us any confidence that they'll do anything fairly or properly or justly. They have their own targets to meet. For instance, now if this is something that's coming directly from the Prime Minister, for instance, we have to be on the lookout for illegal EEA nationals. Then we know, I mean, the Home Office, the way they work, the officials, people going on these raids, they're just going to be looking at and targeting EEA nationals. They'll detain people a few days, few months, few weeks later, will realize, okay, some of them, half of them, most of them will in fact have been here legally or will have had some process in place. So I think for that reason, I mean, like we just saw here, that poor man who actually had the correct papers, but as soon as he sees those turned up from the Home Office, he actually went and hid. And that is the sort of terror that the incompetence of the government and the Home Office strikes in people's hearts.
Well, do you think they're just going for an easy win, though? Because instead of dealing with the problem of people coming across the channel and things like that, they're focusing on people who are here, which they should be doing anyway. But there's a bigger problem coming across the channel that they don't seem to be able to come up with any solution. And anyway, once they are brought into custody, are they going to end up like a lot of the channel migrants, retained and held for a long time, and then in the end being allowed to stay in this country in any case?
Well, we don't know, but I think you're right. I mean, it might just end up being a huge waste of time and money. Because obviously these people, if they're here illegally, then we know they're desperate to be here, aren't they? And then obviously if there is any legal right, if they have family members, any other claim that they can make to stay here, they will use that. I mean, just in December, a few months ago, the High Court found that the UK settlement scheme, the EU settlement scheme, set up to regularise EU nationals was unlawful because of the way it was being operated and the policy behind it. Obviously, at the time, the government said, we're really disappointed. The EU nationals, they're our friends and neighbours, and we will do everything to, resolve things peacefully and so on. But obviously, just a few weeks later, here we are. So I think, it is really, really concerning. And like you said, it is just, the easy target. Obviously, people want immigration brought under control. And this is one way, every few months they can say, 29 people on a plane to Romania, 33 people on a plane to Poland. But are those actually the immigrants that people want the government to be targeting?
It does seem, Ben Habib, I'm going to bring Ben Habib in on this. It does seem, Ben, that this seems like an easy win for the government in a way, and that they're not really doing that much. I mean, they've got this big force to get these 2 or 3 people, one of which was meant to be here anyway, but hid in any case, because you would have people were coming after you like that. Poor thing. I mean, is this really what we're asking the government?
Well, I think it's quite revealing, isn't it, that on a bus they invite GB News to go along. It's almost like they're desperate to convey to the nation that they're doing something about illegal working.
What's wrong with inviting GB News?
Nothing
we
wrong
don't need
with
to be
inviting GB
desperate.
News, but they're desperate to get this message across. And you're absolutely right, Nana. They're distracting from the core issue, which is illegal migration. Remember, Romanians are actually allowed to come to this country legally. They can come here. They're just not allowed to work here. That's the differentiate. You can go to France, you can go to Germany as a British citizen. You're just not allowed to work there. And so these people were rightly arrested if they didn't have a working visa, but it is a distraction. What this government really needs to do, well, it needs to do a lot of things, but amongst all the things it needs to do, it needs to stop the illegal crossings of the Channel, which are illegal, and there's no doubt about that, and they need a proper border force doing that. It won't work through deportation. And they need to actually fix our labour markets so that this need for cheap labour is abated. We've got to stop operating a first world country, which is what we are, as a third world, one. And, I don't know, we've completely lost a mission to up the wealth and the prosperity of the individual in the United Kingdom. We've lost that as a mission statement. We just want to bring in cheap labour. We want GDP to ostensibly be growing, which, by the way, it isn't. It's shrinking. And, we're not making any progress.
Yeah, that sort of winds me up a bit, all of that, because people, especially people who voted to remain, say, oh, well, you see, look what's happened to the labour market. We need to get people from abroad. We'll end up with the cheap labour. We're drunk on cheap labour, and we'll be back to square one. Shoaib, thank you very much for joining me. Shoaib Khan, he's a human rights lawyer. Thank you so much. Right, still with me in the studio, former Brexit MEP Ben Habib. We're talking now about the Unite unions and all the strikes that are going on. Literally everybody wants to strike. The Unite and GMB unions have announced new dates for NHS staff, which will include a joint strike by nurses and ambulance workers on February the 6th, even though the Health Department says that it's having constructive discussions with unions about pay. The joint strike will nevertheless be the largest NHS walkout so far in this long-running dispute. So to give us her views on this announcement is NHS practice nurse Naomi Berry. Naomi, thank you very much for joining me. OK, so could you start off by detailing the pressures that nurses and other NHS staff are currently under so we can get a handle of why people are going on strike in the first place?
There's so many patients that need to be seen. There's so many reviews. There's a lot of pressure on across the whole board, from paramedics to nurses to healthcare to porters, that we just can't keep up with capacity because we haven't got the staff numbers. Years ago, you'd have 4 patients to 1 nurse. You're looking at doubling that, 8, 12, 14 patients to 1 nurse, which is just, it's not doable anymore. The nurses can't continue, paramedics can't continue with minimal staff.
But it feels like the focus is actually on the money. So if you're saying that, but people keep saying, well, you know, we can't afford, we're going to food banks, and we're hearing a lot of stories about nurses doing that, despite other people feeling that the 35 grand is quite a good salary for most. I mean, I don't know where I sit on that. It depends what your expenses are, depends how many kids you've got, depends whether you're single. There's so many different things that could make that a good or bad salary. But the focus feels that it's actually on pay. We've always had that. The NHS has been in a mess for a long time. There have been waiting lists and queues. COVID hasn't helped. We've always been there. So why is it suddenly now that they're saying that that is an issue?
I think pay is an issue. You look at the nurses that are on the floor, the staff nurses, they aren't on a very good wage. They're on a lower band 5, which isn't brilliant at all. And the increases don't happen as what they should be. And that's the issue as well, is the wages aren't going up to cope with the cost of living, and they haven't done for quite a while. And it's how can we expect them to continue buying foods when it's increasing, paying for childcare, because by the time you've put a child in childcare, that's your wage gone. So that's why a lot of people aren't working anymore as well, because it's £1,000 a week to put a child in childcare some places.
But that's no different for anything, OK? So it's £1,000 a week anyway. Some people might say that you're disguising, the nurses are disguising their need for more money because of inflation, and trying to sort of make it look like actually it's more to do with the pay, the conditions that they're having to deal with, and the fact that they're waiting lists and everything to sort of garner our sympathy. Would you say that that's a real argument, or do you feel that that's sort of an unfair thing to say?
I think it's an unfair thing to say. The pay has always been an issue for nurses. It's always been one of the big things, that the pay isn't where it needs to be. We have to pay an extra £120 a year to stay registered. We pay £16, £17 a month to a union on top of that, plus tax, plus transport. So there's a lot of unhidden fees that people see that go on as well with us that's not broadcasted. Of what we have to pay. I mean, £120 is a lot of money when you're paying it out per year.
Yeah, but, you know, but other professions have to pay to be registered. I mean, even as a fitness instructor, I used to teach and do fitness. I have to pay insurance every year. I have to pay for PRS and PPL, and you don't get paid that much. I mean, you know, everybody, and £17 for the unions. The unions are the ones that are actually fighting your corner, so surely that's money well spent.
Oh, it is money well spent, Nana. I'm not saying that at all. I think the issue is it is fair pay and about the conditions as well. I think nurses do need that recognition around it. So I don't think you're ever going to find a fair argument between either of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, and I mean, I wouldn't argue with that at all. I do believe nurses should be paid more anyway, but to put it out there, there are those who actually earn less than you that would think, hang on a minute, that seems a lot to me. But as we know already, we were talking about waiting lists, they're the longest they've ever been. You were saying that this is what you're striking to sort of draw attention to how difficult the conditions are. Is now really the best time to be staging the last strikes that the NHS has ever had to face, in spite of that?
There's never a right time, and I've said this before, even if they started striking during COVID, it wouldn't have been the right time. It wouldn't have been the right time pre-COVID as well. People are living longer, which means that there's more operations happening within the elderly, there's more knee, hip, joint replacements going on as well. There's more of the elderly that need to be in hospital for the care that they can't get into the care homes because they're full as well. So, no, there's never a right time.
No, there never is a right time. Look, I mean, I want the nurses to be paid well, whatever that will be. Naomi Berry, thank you very much for joining me. She's an NHS practice nurse. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. It's coming up to 23 minutes after 5 o'clock. You're with me, I'm Nana Akwe. This is GB News. Coming up, Germany is still yet to make a decision on whether to send tanks to Ukraine. The US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin met with other military leaders at Ramstein in Germany this afternoon in an attempt to progress on aid for Ukraine. We'll bring you the latest on that next, but before that, let's take a look at the weather.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGibbon from the Met Office. It's a beautiful afternoon out there for most of us. Sunny skies, crisp winter sunshine. But another frosty night follows for the vast majority. Not for all, however. Changes are afoot. This area of mild air coming in from the west will slowly topple into northwestern areas during the start of the weekend, bringing cloud, rain and increased wind, but also milder conditions. However, for the evening, For many, it's clear skies and light winds and temperatures falling away, a widespread frost forming. Temperatures as low as -3, -4 Celsius widely, and as low as -7 to -10 Celsius for some sheltered parts of Scotland, northern England. But we'll also see some freezing fog patches first thing. These will be slow to clear across central and southern parts of the UK. Now for western Scotland and Northern Ireland, a complete contrast. It's frost-free first thing here, but also cloudy, damp and breezy. Gales around exposed western shores of Scotland, and those gales pushing into the Northern Isles by the afternoon. As the rain moves east over the cold air, there's the risk of freezing rain for a time for the Grampians and some flakes of snow as well. But further south, well, it's another sparkling winter's day. England and Wales seeing plenty of sunshine, 5 or 6 Celsius, up to 9 Celsius in the far northwest of Scotland, but it turns even more unsettled here on Saturday night. Wind and rain pushing in, some heavy and persistent rain for Northern Ireland as well as western Scotland, and those outbreaks of rain reaching parts of Wales and western England by the end of the night. So frost-free as we begin Sunday in the west, but for southeastern parts of the UK, well, that's where the coldest weather will be on Sunday morning. Freezing fog once again and a widespread frost, -3, -4 degrees. Now for London, East Anglia and the southeast, Sunday's looking like another bright but cold day, and we keep the cold air actually into the start of next week in the southeast, but for the rest of the UK it's milder, it's cloudier and it's breezier.
On Mark Dolan tonight in a world exclusive, Katie Price joins us live to talk fame, love, money, plastic surgery and her hopes for the future.
Get tuned in as for GB News. I'm meeting up with my old mate, Mark Dolan. It's been ages since I've done an interview with him.
That's Katie Price on Mark Dolan tonight on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel. 28 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akue. Welcome on board if you've just tuned in. I'm in for Patrick Christy. He is back next week, though, so don't worry. Although we have some nice messages there. Somebody said that, oh, no, you're much nicer looking. We're happy with you. But listen, stay tuned as well, because tomorrow it's my show at 4 till 6. So join me on Saturday and Sunday. But right now we're moving on to Germany, which is set to make a decision on whether to send Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. Now, the US Defence Secretary Lloyd Lloyd Austin today led a meeting of Western defence ministers at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. He praised the UK's decision to supply Ukraine with Challenger 2 tanks, but stopped short of pledging American-made vehicles despite requests from Ukraine. Now, despite still not making a decision on sending support, Germany's new defence minister said that Berlin wasn't unilaterally preventing the delivery of the Leopard 2 tanks. Catherine Foster, our GB News political reporter, joins me live from Westminster. Catherine, what is the latest on that meeting?
Well, disappointingly for Volodymyr Zelensky, although there has been a lot of unity, a lot of military aid has been pledged from these Western countries, so a success by some measures. But the tanks, the Leopard 2 tanks that Germany could unlock, that has yet to happen. So Zelensky this morning asking very strongly via video link for these tanks and saying, we have to speed up, it's in your power. This is not just about the future of Ukraine, this is about the future of Europe. But although the UK has pledged 14 of its modern Challenger 2 battle tanks, although France is sending some modern battle tanks, the Leopard 2 tanks that Germany manufactures and controls, there's about 3,000 of them in about 12 countries across Europe. They are easy to maintain, easy to run, easy to train Ukrainians to use, and easy to get parts. But Germany is still considering its options, and although it has said it's not blocking the tanks being sent, it hasn't said that it will send the tanks, nor has it given the green light to countries like Finland or Poland who would like to send the Leopard 2 tanks but currently can't because there is a German export license agreement and Germany has not okayed it.
So what is it that Germany are really concerned about? Because we are, it would appear, in my view, we are in a war, ultimately, because we are involved within the war, as are Germany. So what are they worried about?
Well, they're concerned about the potential fallout from Vladimir Putin. They very much want not to be taking the lead in this. I don't really think there's any chance of this, but what they would really like is to have the cover of falling in behind the United States. Now, the United States are spending a huge $2.6 billion in military aid, but they are not sending their modern battle tanks. Now, they say that they run on jet fuel, that they're very complicated, they take a long time to train, so they're not sending those. That is what Germany would like. Germany have basically said that they would send the Leopard 2 if America would send their tanks. America has said, well, you're a sovereign country, you can make your own decisions, that's a decision for you to make. But of course, Germany have, over recent years, been very friendly towards Russia, let their energy become very dependent on Russia. Although they've weaned themselves off to a large extent, they're still bringing in Russian gas and oil via third parties, if not directly. And of course, going back to the Second World War, for many decades, they had a pacifist approach. They didn't want to get involved in conflict. They ran down their armed forces. And of course, they're worried because although they've been sending defensive weaponry, and although Volodymyr Zelensky needs these tanks to defend Ukraine, they are also potentially offensive vehicles. And so they are concerned about what Vladimir Putin might do. Of course, he's warned of terrible consequences before, but Zelensky is stressing these are only going to be used on Ukrainian soil.
Catherine Forster, thank you very much. She's our GB News' political reporter. Oldest trick in the book, that if you then I, that is the oldest negotiating trick in the book. You're with me, I'm Nana Akwe. This is GB News. We'll have the latest from our GB News People's Poll. This week it found that the majority of you think that 16 is way too young to decide for people whether they should transition to another gender. I'll speak to founder of Standing Up for Women, Kelly J. Keane, next. And we'll be getting a military breakdown of what splits in the Western Alliance could mean for the soldiers on the ground in Ukraine. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you. It's 5:33. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. Next month, we'll see the biggest strike action ever to hit the NHS after Unite announced 10 further days of industrial action by ambulance workers in the coming weeks. Members of the Unite Union are joining 10,000 ambulance staff with the GMB Union, along with the Royal College of Nursing, in joint action on February the 6th. The workers across England, Wales and Northern Ireland are walking out in a long-running dispute over pay and staffing. Downing Street says it's disappointed, but they're open to further discussions. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been holding talks with Western nations, urging them to give more military aid for their fight against Russia. Kyiv has requested 300 tanks. Germany have yet to make a decision on whether they will send tanks to the war-torn country. Meanwhile, the US announced a further £2 billion worth of support for Ukraine. The US Defence Secretary has commended the UK for agreeing to supply Challenger 2 tanks. A new report into England's fire and rescue services says reforms are needed as a matter of urgency. The watchdog says just 2 of the 6 recommendations made by the Chief Inspectorate have been fulfilled. In an annual report, the Chief Inspector, Andy Cook, says he's frustrated at the lack of progress made since the inspection started in 2018. The Met Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, has promised a thorough review of the force's culture and standards in an effort to root out corrupt officers, such as former officer David Carrick. Mr Rowley said the next 2 years are critical to achieving our goals. It comes as the National Police Chiefs Council are urging chiefs across England and Wales to have all officers checked against national databases by the end of March. Controversial influencer Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan will remain in custody for a further 30 days until the 27th of February after a court in Romania extended their police detention. The pair are being investigated over allegations of sexual assault and exploitation. A judge has decided they'll remain in prison for longer while police continue to investigate. The self-proclaimed misogynist was arrested in Bucharest on the 29th of December. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. It's coming up to 39 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Aquia. Now, there are fears that the continued squabbling amongst Western countries over the issue of whether or not to provide Ukraine with more battle tanks plays right into President Putin's hands. Now, whilst the UK has already pledged 14 of its Challenger 2 tanks to help Ukraine, Germany still hasn't decided whether or not to provide Kyiv with any of its Leopard 2 tanks. Well, joining me now is Con Coughlin, Defence Editor and Chief Foreign Affairs columnist at The Telegraph. Con, thank you for joining me. Now, you wrote a column on this. Tell us a bit more about it.
Well, yes, I was just looking at the way the conflict is going. I mean, we're coming up to the first year anniversary of Putin's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. When Putin made his decision to invade Ukraine, one of his calculations was that the West was far too divided to come to Ukraine's assistance. And of course, he's been sorely disappointed. But, a year into the conflict, just at the point when, the Ukrainians have been doing quite well, we now have what I think are very unseemly disagreements between key Western allies, in particular, the Germans and the British and the French, over what kind of equipment to provide to Ukraine. And this conference that's going on in Ramstein in Germany today is designed to shore up support for Ukraine, but instead of concentrating on the weaponry we should give to Ukraine, what's happening is we're having this argument about whether which countries are going to send tanks and which countries are not, and with the Germans being very difficult indeed.
Well, because I remember at the beginning it was all about the red lines and which red lines, and we were literally defining Vladimir Putin's red lines for him without him even saying anything. And then he gave us a threat which he didn't follow through, and we've sort of pushed further and further away. So why are the Germans so concerned, seeing as the UK have said they're sending tanks? It's hardly like as if we are actually an island in a space where, heaven forbid, but we are not attached to the rest of Europe. So we're definitely a target. The Americans have set their support and given a lot of money, and they've pledged more. Why have they come up with a sort of nonsensical if you then I? If you give us these tanks that are going to be completely useless to the Ukrainians, then we will do something about it. Why are they coming up with something that really it wouldn't make sense for the Americans to agree with?
Well, no, the official German argument is the concern about escalation. And as you said, Putin has made all kinds of threats over the last year. And I've said on GB News many times, this is all bluster by a Russian president who's losing the war. So he makes all these silly threats about nuclear weapons, and anyone knows about the whole nuclear issue knows this is just nonsense. But I mean, the Germans are using this as an excuse because they have a long-standing relationship with Moscow. And they're very reluctant to see it completely destroyed. And they think that any attempt by NATO powers, and of course Britain is a prominent European NATO power, any attempt by the NATO powers to increase support for Ukraine will further alienate Russia, particularly so far as Germany is concerned, and they don't want to do that. So there's a lot of politics at play here. And a lot of excuses being made, but what we really need to do is to make sure the Ukrainians have the kit they need to win this war, because I think that would be very good for Europe if Russia ends up getting a bloody nose as a consequence of its unprovoked aggression against Ukraine.
You'd think that the Germans might be slightly concerned of the kickback if they don't allow us to send all these tanks and allow other countries to send their tanks, because in the end, what will happen, Germany literally, I mean, in my view, seems to be pretty much one of the main players running the EU. Won't this then cause division within the EU itself? And actually, this could be a bigger problem to Germany than Russia, surely?
Well, I think you're right, Nana. I think there's a lot of tension building up within the EU. Of course, when it comes to European security, the EU itself is a bit of a bit player. NATO looks after European security. The EU would love to take it over. For decades they've been talking about creating their own defence force, which we have resisted quite rightly. but nothing's come of it. And it comes down to NATO. And, I think NATO is getting pretty fed up with the German position. And a lot of major NATO countries, particularly the US and Britain, and even France, are getting very frustrated with the Germans. But, they are in far closer proximity to Russia than those countries. And we cannot ignore German concerns. But, if Putin is sitting in the Kremlin watching this, he will conclude that he was right all along, that there are divisions in the West, that the NATO alliance cannot act as one when it comes to major security concerns in the heart of Europe. And he will take comfort from that and think that in the long term, he can win this war.
Well, let's hope that the Germans get on with it. Con Coughlin, thank you very much for joining me. He's the defence. Thank you so much. He's the defence editor and chief of foreign affairs and a columnist at The Telegraph. Now it's time for our GB News People's Poll. Now, this week, we've been asking you about gender. And I've asked majority of you said that 16-year-olds are too young to change their gender. 41% completely agreed that that is too young, whilst 8% said they completely disagreed. We can also reveal that 22% of the public strongly support the government's blocking of the controversial gender reform bill. So with me now is Kelly J. Keane, founder of Standing for Women. Kelly, are the majority right to think that 16 is too young?
Absolutely. I'm surprised it wasn't 100%.
Yeah. Well, I don't know who the 8% were, but yeah, very odd, isn't it? So what, in your view, why do you think that this bill is kind of being reformed by the Scottish people, and in particular Nicola Sturgeon, SNP party, who want to bring this bill to the forefront when no one was really talking about it?
I think she might see it as some sort of legacy. I think she might see herself in this position of the most virtue signalling leader. Of course, she's competing with Biden, Trudeau, and the newly resigned Ardern. So I can only think it's really bad reasons. I can't think of a single good reason why anybody would want children, minors, to change their sex at all. I mean, frankly, I don't think anybody should, but certainly not under 18s. It's absolutely preposterous.
And it's a worrying thing that people keep going on about saying, but it's only a tiny minority. But in my view, it isn't a tiny minority. Surely this idea that at 16 you can do this and you don't even need any sort of medical referral, so nobody even needs to see you, that you can then go and do that, and potentially you can do that legally as well. Doesn't this open the floodgates to actually any predator?
Well, it's not just the whole idea of safeguarding and predators is deeply concerning, and we do see the most vile violence anytime I try and speak publicly with women who want to just talk about this issue. Maybe they've lost children to this cult or whatever their connection is with this. Might have lost their jobs, being compelled to speak. We get really aggressive opposition trying to stop women talking. And this is bolstered and emboldened by the fact that the state has got involved with something that isn't really a state issue. It's not up to the Scottish government to affirm people in something that frankly isn't true.
Well, Kelly J, stay there. I've got Ben Habib with me. Ben, what's your view on that? Because ultimately, this feels like a divisive ploy to break up the union again, to create division. I don't think it actually has any genuine roots in actually wanting to help trans people.
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely 92%. I mean, I don't know why, as you say, it wasn't 100%. 92% don't want this. So if politicians are taking their lead from popular demand, it's not wanted. But that's typical, isn't it? I don't want to use the word woke lightly and as a throwaway term, but this is a typical woke issue. This is an issue that does affect the minority of people, but they're enforcing their will on the majority. And in doing so, they inculcate division. It's the same with BLM. We were discussing this in the break. You know, it's the same with all these other minority issues that are promoted almost to sort of as if it's an existential threat to the way communities operate. And in doing that, they drive their agenda home. They inculcate division, and that's the aim, of course. You know, they all have perhaps different ultimate goals, but ultimately it's damaging the union, it's damaging, you know, society, and It's the promotion, just to repeat myself, the promotion of minority rights at the expense, often, of the majority, and that is wrong.
Well, it's at the expense of women. Kelly J. Keane, final word to you. How do you see this should go forward? Do you think they should scrap it all together, or do you feel there is some relevance to some of the changes there? What's your thoughts, final thoughts to you?
I think we should totally scrap any idea that somebody can legally change their sex in any shape or form. That's my view. I think the UK government now, as a whole, needs to get rid of the Gender Recognition Act. Let's just get rid of it all. No more legal fictions. That would be good for women.
Thank you very much. Very, very decisive. Kelly J. Keane, lovely to talk to you. Moving on, motorists might only need to get an MOT every 2 years. Now, that is under new proposals being considered by the government. The plan could see car owners save money, but has been greeted with scepticism by some road safety groups, and the consultation's been commissioned by the Department of Transport into having an MOT 4 years after a car has been been registered, rather than the current. So with me now is motoring journalist and former Top Gear presenter Quentin Wilson. Quentin, what do you make of these proposals?
Well, nobody's asked for them. And why would you want to reduce road safety? The government says it's going to cost £100 million or save £100 million to consumers. But really, it's only, what, £40 that's the average cost of an MOT that you'll save. So we know that people are hard up. They're not servicing their cars. I spoke to a Quick Fit MOT tester, Quick Fit, the largest MOT providers in the country, and he said he sees cars that are 3 years old coming up for the first MOT with bald tyres and worn-out brakes because people aren't servicing them properly. So this will reduce road safety, not improve it. And everybody from the Franchise Dealers Association, the AA, the RAC, the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders all say the same thing. No, don't do it. It's a step too far. And the thing here, Nana, is I think it's electioneering. I think the government are doing this because they want to throw this sop to the beleaguered motorists and make them think that they're on their side. So there's a consultation, absolutely resist it. We need to keep this rigorous testing standard in our country to keep our roads safer.
Well, also, when you go for an MOT, the car has to be insured as well. So it's almost like a double check on the insurance that you've got the car insured. Because I do it, obviously, if you didn't have insurance, then I don't think it would go through because you have to put in all the details of your...
Technically, you can MOT a car without having insurance because the test doesn't look at it. But on the website, you can't
do it
tax your
online.
car without your MOT. But back in 2012, I looked at the numbers. 800,000 cars failed their MOT for dangerous faults in the first MOT. Now that's 2.5 million. So it's gone up because people haven't got the money to look after their cars properly. So I think it's a really, really retrograde step.
And also, when I take my car to an MOT, I know if there's some problems, but a lot of the time when it picks up stuff, I would never have even known that was wrong with the car.
Completely. And I think, broadly, the population is becoming less car skilled than they were when I was much younger, and we tinkered with our cars in the driveways and we did all this stuff with our repair manuals, and people don't know what to do, and also you can't really fix much stuff on modern cars because it's all really complicated. So the MOT is this vital moment in the year cycle where somebody professional looks at your car and tells you what's wrong and what's unsafe.
So going forward then, if this does go ahead, what would you say would be the biggest worry? Obviously, there's safety, but are there any other worries with regard to that as well?
Well, the government claimed that the amount of killed and serious injuries due to mechanical faults on cars is low. But I would say we don't know that because when there are accidents, the cars aren't forensically inspected to see what was wrong, what caused the accident. So those figures that they trumpet, I believe they'll be much, much greater. And this will cost lives, make no mistake about it. I spent a lot of time in France. They have a system where it's an MOT every 2 years. And you look at the cars in the car parks, and they're just, so badly maintained with lighting faults and tyre faults. And, we don't want to go down that road. We have really, really safe standards in this country. Let's not muck about with it.
Well, final word to you, Ben Habib. Do you drive?
I do drive, and, normally I would be all for deregulation because, it takes the burden off business, takes the burden off the consumer. But Quentin is absolutely right. This is one issue that no one's crying out to have relieved, and it is dangerous. I know every time I take my car in, there's something, for an MOT, there's something that I couldn't have predicted is wrong with it. Last time I took mine in, it had a gash down one of the tyres, which were new last time. And I thought, well, he's having me on, isn't he? This guy's having me on.
He's just done it himself.
He's just, he wants... But no, I didn't think he did that. But I thought he was, making a mountain out of a molehill. But then he showed me the gash. And so I think it's a regressive step. No one wants it. We've got great road safety. Fantastic for Top Gear for speaking utter sense. I'm completely in agreement with Quentin.
He's not on Top Gear anymore, are you? what are you doing now, briefly?
I do lots of stuff, lobbying for electric cars.
The electric cars.
OK, now we're going to have a disagreement.
Honestly, the spawn of Satan. You promised me a lift in that Tesla.
I know, you haven't sort of any time.
Right, I'll get your number later.
OK, all right, and I promise we're going to do that. And we can agree to disagree.
Fabulous. Well, of course, that's Quentin Wilson, a motoring legend and journalist. OK, let's find out, though. Ben Habib, thank you very much for joining me as well. Up next, though, it's Dubes & Co with Michelle Dewberry, who is here in the studio. Michelle, what have you got coming up?
Hello, Nana. My eyes are watering. Something Ben Habib just said innocently then has a very different meaning from where I'm from, that is for sure. But anyway, moving on, where I have... You've thrown me, Ben Habib. Coming up in my show tonight, one of the EU bosses says that he would be delighted for Keir Starmer to be the Prime Minister of the UK. Of course he would. Do you reckon Keir Starmer would be a soft touch? Probably trying to shoo us all back into the EU, wouldn't he? What do you think to that? And kids, are they getting more violent? You know, I don't remember all this stamping people's heads and all of this kind of adults being murdered by kids. Is it social media, or is it just genuinely that kids are getting more violent? How do we deal with it? Ukraine, Germany dragging their heels when it comes to exporting tanks. Should the UK apply pressure to them or not? And Beltgate, #Beltgate. And people got better things to do than obsess about Rishi Sunak's seatbelt. Goodness me. We'll have all that. And two of my favourites, by the way, Paul Embry, Alex Dean, will be joining me tonight.
Well, I'm well into that seatbelt thing. I mean, if he wasn't wearing it, he's breaking the law, Michelle. That's what I think.
Oh, Nana, the police are looking into it. What I say to them is look into the crimes that are occurring and outstanding in your patch, rather than all that nonsense.
Well, that is a good point, Michelle. I'm looking forward to your show later. Thank you so much. That is Michelle Dewberry. She is up next. Well, listen, you've been with me. I'm Nana Akwe. This, of course, is GB News. Thank you so much to Ben Habib for joining me today. Thank you so much, Ben. It was a pleasure working with you. And thank you to you at home for your company. I'll be back tomorrow at 4 for my usual show. Stay with me for that. But stay right here, right now, because Michelle is here after the weather.
Hello. It was a beautiful day out there on Friday, and it's going to stay that way into the weekend for England and Wales. Milder conditions, though, in the far west, spreading into parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland during the evening, accompanied by wet and windy weather as well. Meanwhile, for much of the UK as we head into Friday evening, it's clear skies and light winds, temperatures soon falling below freezing widely, and by the end of the night, -3, -4 Celsius across much of the UK, -7 to -10 degrees over some parts of snow-covered northern England and northeast Scotland. Freezing fog patches around first thing as well, from the Vale of York into the Midlands, Welsh Marches, southwest England. They'll be slow to clear, could cause some issues on the roads first thing. But a completely different story for western Scotland and for Northern Ireland. Here, cloud and rain will have been increasing through the night, and a strengthening wind with gales around western coast of Scotland and the Northern Isles by the afternoon, along with those outbreaks of rain. Those outbreaks of rain will reach parts of the Grampians, falling into cold air, leading to the risk of freezing rain by the afternoon here. But apart from the cloudy, breezy, damp weather in the northwest, we're also going to see plenty of dry weather